All right, I'm going to call this meeting to order. Today's Planning Commission meeting, December 12th, 2019 at 6:30. Charlie, can we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Barrera has an excused absence this evening. Commissioner Donaldson?
Here.
Commissioner Keller?
Here.
We are expecting Commissioner Sohani in a little bit. He has a previous commitment, so he'll be a few minutes late. Commissioner Young?
Here.
Vice Chair Thompson?
Here.
And Chair Guerrero.
Here.
So we have a quorum of 5 commissioners present.
Thank you. All right, so at this point I want to open up the floor to public comment for any items that are not on tonight's agenda. All right, seeing none, we'll move on. We're going to move item number 4 to next month's meeting, as we don't have Commissioner Barrera here tonight, and she was one of the 4 that has to approve the meetings from notes from that evening. So we'll extend that to the next commission meeting for January.
Right.
All right, so moving on, we have the Community Development Director's Report, item 5.
Thank you, Chair Guerrero and members of the Commission. First, with regard to recent City Council actions, the City Council has had 3 meetings since your last meeting on October 24th, and those 3 meetings were on November 5th, November 19th, and December 3rd. On November 5th, the Council held a study session on bird-safe development standards, and they directed staff to prepare an ordinance for setting such standards. This is tentatively scheduled for a public hearing at your February 27th meeting. The Council authorized a $2 million pre-development loan to Resources for Community Development, or RCD, to acquire the site at 3600 San Pablo Avenue, where ECAP is currently located, for development of supportive housing for the formerly homeless and a new facility for ECAP. RCD is a nonprofit housing developer that also owns the Bay Bridge Apartments, which are located immediately adjacent to this property on 36th Street. Any proposed future development for this project will, of course, require Planning Commission approval, so you will be seeing this on your future agendas. Concerning Marketplace Parcel B appeal, the City Council voted unanimously to refer this item to the Planning Commission for a supplemental report, and that is the first item on tonight's agenda. On November 19th, the Council held a study session on so-called REACH codes, which are related to energy conservation and climate change, and they referred the matter to the Sustainability Committee for further discussion. The Council received the annual informational report on the development impact fees for fiscal years 2018 and 19, and the report was approved by the Council at the subsequent meeting on December 3rd. And the Council passed the first reading of 2 ordinances adopting the new state building and fire codes with local amendments. The local amendments include new provisions for fire safety during construction of wood frame buildings and gas shutoff valves that will automatically turn off natural gas in the event of an earthquake. Both of these ordinances were passed on December 3rd, and they will take effect on January 2nd. And then also on December 3rd, the Council held their annual election of mayor and vice mayor, and they elected Councilmember Pats as mayor and Councilmember Martinez as vice mayor for the coming year. They also received an informational report on implementation of the city's economic development strategy in 2019. And in other news, I just want to remind you, I sent you a postcard a few days ago. There is a reception for the 2019 Emeryville Art Purchase Award next Thursday, a week from tonight, on December 19th. That will be from 5:30 to 7 p.m. at the Senior Center. And finally, this is our last meeting of 2019, so I just want to take this opportunity to wish you all a very happy holiday season and a happy new year. And I just want to say that it's a real pleasure to work with such a thoughtful, intelligent group of people, and I really enjoy it, and I look forward to working with you more in 2020. That concludes my report. I'd be happy to respond to any questions.
Thanks so much, Charlie. Do you have any questions from the commissioners here? No? All right. Happy holidays to you also. All right. So we're going to continue on here. Item number 6, for any ex parte communications or conflict of interest. Seeing none? All right. I want to go ahead and move on to item 7.1. This is the Marketplace Redevelopment Project, Parcel B, and invite Maru here to the front for a presentation. Great.
Good evening, Commission. Our first item today is the Parcel B Marketplace proposal. This has a fairly long background and chronology, which I will walk you through just so that we are all on the same page. So back in 2008, the council approved the Marketplace PDP, and this approval laid out the site plan, the mix of uses, heights of individual buildings, and the general massing. So this was the approved PUD build-out, and this is kind of the illustrative axonometric diagram. After that, between February of 2015 and June of 2016, the Commission approved FTPs for 4 new buildings, an FTP for an expanded and renovated park, realignment of Shellmount Street, and creation of 62nd and 63rd Streets. Below, in front of you, are the different FTPs that have been approved and been implemented. So as you know, the grocery store has been built. The residential wrap around the building is under construction. Parcel D is also under construction. In fact, there are the residents have already started, have taken occupancy. The park was one of the first things to be built and be available for the public to use. And then Parcel B, at that time, it was simply a parking structure with ground floor retail. And then Parcel A, which is a residential building for which then FTP was approved. And the construction has not yet started. So this was the build out of the various FTPs so that you kind of know the location of it already. In terms of Parcel B, as I indicated, in 2016, the FTP was only for a parking garage with ground floor retail. The garage is to provide parking for existing commercial uses that have been served by previous surface parking lots, Parcel C, and are being served by existing parking lot for Parcel A. The city center wished to modify the proposal for Parcel B in order to accommodate office and lab space. And they proposed a 130 feet tall, 8-story building with ground floor retail, parking, as well as lab space. This was approved by the Commission in January of this year. The approval was appealed by Wareham on February. And the City Council then remanded the appeal to the Planning Commission in March. The Planning Commission reviewed the appeal and unanimously reapproved the project at a special meeting in May. The Council then called the project for review on May 21st. The approval was again appealed by Wareham on a week later. On October 1st, the Council considered the appeal and set a hearing date for November 5th. On October 31st, the applicant submitted a proposed alternative project. And then the Council had the meeting on November 5th. So at this November 5th meeting, the Council discussed extensively the merits of the appeal, and they also discussed the proposed alternative. The direction that the Council gave is that the proposed alternative be developed into a full FTP package for the Planning Commission to review. So the Planning Commission today will be making a recommendation to the City Council on this proposed alternative. And that is all we are going to be talking about, and we're not going to go into the merits of the appeal. So the project proposal, as you see, the first column is the appealed FTP, and then the second column is the proposal that is in front of you today. In terms of uses, the retail and the lab space remain the same. In terms of parking, the parking is reduced by 60 spaces. The height has increased slightly by 7 feet, from 113 to 120 feet. And there will be a 82-foot setback at the south end on the 6th level. So in terms of stories, the earlier project was 8 stories with 5 levels of parking and 3 levels of office. Today it is now 9 stories with 5 levels of parking and 4 levels of lab. So this is the picture of this, the vacant space where this building is going to go. It's a little older picture. They now have some stormwater treatment here for the temporary, since it's taken a year for anything to happen. So here's the site again in the larger context of the marketplace. And the site plan has basically not changed. You, on the ground floor, you have ground floor retail indicated by red in color, and then you have parking, a little bit of parking, and this is where the loading and servicing activities would occur. The entry and exit will occur from the north end, while the south end is going to be used only for exiting, and there's a circulation diagram, or better circulation diagram later on. So the second level is the parking level. Third and fourth levels are parking as well as the fifth. Office levels start from 6th and go up till the 9th floor. On the 6th floor, there is a roof terrace right here. So there is a setback, like I said, of the building of about 82 feet. And the remaining floors above this are office. This is the circulation diagram. Like I said, there's entry and exit allowed in and out on the north end and only out at the south end. There's also long-term bike parking here. Again, this has not changed from what you have seen in January. This is the servicing plan for delivery vehicles, and this is the discards collection plan or the trash plan. And this is, again, the trash will be collected for both the commercial, the ground floor retail, as well as the lab space at the bottom. And so the enclosure will be inside. And what you see outside here is that the trash bins will be brought out on the day the trash is going to be picked up. And this sort of indicates where the truck would be parked. And then the bins would be taken in once these are emptied. So there will be no trash enclosure outside the building. The reason I'm emphasizing this is one of the things that the City Council provided was regarding trash, and I'll again repeat that at the end of the presentation. So this is the new elevation. As you see, this is the big difference is the terrace here. Earlier, the building was a rectangular, and you had office labs on top of here. This is the railroad elevation, pretty similar to what you've seen, and these are the north and the south elevations. In terms of public art, the DA does allow the use of public arts for building elevations, and the applicant is proposing to use public art for its east and west elevations. The art committee had recommended approval of the public art final plan that allocates about $750,000 for the west elevation and $250,000 for the east elevation. And this plan also identifies artists that will work on each elevation. So this is where the public art will go, and below are some of the works of the artists that have been shortlisted to provide art for the building. This is this building long section, which kind of tells you how the building will function. You have ground floor retail, parking, and then office. So this is the comparison, basically, of the top portion is the approved FTP that was approved in January and then later on in May, and this is the proposal in front of you. So as you can see, there is a big, and this building behind is Emery Station West, so that's kind of shown how the building will appear from the users of Emery Station West and what they will be looking at. So this is kind of how the Parcel B looks in context of other buildings in the marketplace area, and this was the previous FDP proposal, so it doesn't look too different other than this notch here. So in terms of conformity and consistency with the approved PUD PDP, the height is consistent with the approved PDP. In terms of the net change is that compared to the approved PDP, there will be about 90,000 square feet of less commercial space. These are kind of some of the diagrams that kind of compare. The top one is the approved PDP. The one in between is the approved FDP. And then what is in front of you is at the bottom. This kind of gives you, again, an indication of the building massing of the approved PDP, again, the approved FDP, and then the proposal in front of you. The green line is the building line for Emery Station West. So in terms of conformity with the Shellmount Streetscape Design Guidelines, these guidelines outline sidewalk widths, paving materials, streetscape furniture, and design of facilities such as bus stops. The plans are consistent with the tentative map approval that was previously determined to be consistent with the guidelines, and a lot of the landscaping and streetscape is already on the ground and has been built and in the ground. In terms of environmental review, the staff report contains an extensive discussion of that, including an environmental checklist. And we find that there have been no substantial changes in the project, and the circumstances under which the project will be undertaken, and no new information has arisen that would require preparation of a subsequent or supplemental EIR. In terms of City Council direction and response, so first thing was regarding public art. The City Councils wanted to see a new condition that would require review of the public art by the Council prior to the issuance of a building permit. And this has been included in the draft conditions that are attached to the staff report. In terms of terrace roof deck, the Council wanted the applicant to examine making public access to the terrace or the roof deck space. The applicant has not proposed this, meaning the terrace would be used by the employees within the building and would not be accessible to the public at large. They cite issues of privacy as well as the cost of making the space accessible. I'm sure the applicant will get further into the reasons behind that. In terms of trash, at the November 5th council meeting, it seemed that the council was under the impression that the trash enclosures were outside the building, and therefore they gave direction to enclose them within the building. So so to that extent, these were already there. The trash enclosures are inside the building, and that hasn't changed with the proposal. So that is my presentation. We are recommending that you recommend that the council approve the staff report and rescind the old FTP, which was for only parking garage and ground floor retail. Before I walk away, I would like to point out to a few documents that you have received after the staff report was issued. One is a updated wind study, which basically examined whether the wind conditions on the roof terrace. There was again a direction of the council. And this other one is an updated traffic study. In addition to that, I believe you would have received a letter from Wareham's attorney. I trust that you have had a chance to review it, and we do have a response, and Charlie is going to walk you through the staff response to the letter received on Wareham today.
Thank you, Miru. I believe that first the Assistant City Attorney would like to address an issue.
Yes, in terms of the procedural posture for tonight, actually the Planning Commission is going to be rendering a supplemental report to the City Council. In rendering that report, you'll go through the analysis that you're very familiar with in determining whether to approve an FDP. But because this has gone up on appeal and the City Council has asked for specific analysis from the Planning Commission, it's a supplemental report that's being rendered to the city council.
Not a recommendation for whatever.
Well, there's nothing about the rescission of the prior FDP in the current resolution.
Oh.
And it's, the resolution states that there is substantial evidence, but there's not necessarily the recommendation that we typically make.
Okay. They did actually ask for a recommendation on a couple of issues, which we will talk about. The roof deck and the...
Got it.
Yes.
Thank you. In terms of the roof deck, you have more details for the commission about making that a public space or not?
Yes.
Got it.
Yes. So this is the letter I hope you all have in front of you from Wareham's council. And staff would just like to take this opportunity to respond to, from staff's perspective, to the issues that have been raised in this letter. So I'll just walk through it. The first page is just introduction and a background, and that doesn't require any response. The second page, second section, is about providing public access to the roof deck, and it suggests that the roof deck of this building should have public access similar to the Emery Station West development across the tracks, and that the council should require this or desired that this be required. I would just like to note that the council did not indicate that they would require the roof deck to be publicly accessible. Their motion that they passed on November 5th included, and I quote, that the Planning Commission will examine in the course of their review public access to the roof deck space, unquote. So the council is seeking the commission's recommendation on this issue, and the applicant has indicated that it's not feasible. We would note that the proposed roof deck on Parcel B is very different from the one at Emery Station West across the railroad tracks. The one at Emery Station West is approximately 28 feet above grade. It includes a grand staircase to Horton Street at the east end and a direct connection to the pedestrian bridge over the railroad at the west end. As such, it's an easy climb on a direct pedestrian route from east of the railroad to the public market, and therefore is conducive to direct, easy public access. The proposed roof deck at Parcel B, on the other hand, would be 60 feet above grade. It would not provide a direct pedestrian connection to anything. Therefore, it's unlikely to be attractive to pedestrians to use. It should be further noted that the approved project immediately to the south on Parcel A will include an elevated roof deck that will connect to the pedestrian bridge over the railroad via a grand staircase from Shellmound Street at an elevation of about 30 feet above grade, which would mirror the condition across the railroad at Emery Station West. There's no need for Parcel B to also include this same condition. It should also be noted that the landscaped roof terrace at Emery Station West was cited as a public benefit to qualify for a development bonus to exceed the 100-foot height limit east of the railroad. No such development bonus is required for Parcel B. Concerning their point number 3, clarifying the scope of the proposed public art. This discussion suggests that the council should approve rather than simply review the public art, and that it should be explicitly indicated as to where that public art would be located on the building within the conditions of approval. Again, the council's motion, and I'm quoting again here, is, quote, there will be an additional condition of approval that will add a requirement to the city council that the city council shall review any final art for the exterior of Parcel B prior to the FDP receiving a building permit, end quote. So it was the council's language to review the art as opposed to approve the art, and that is the language that's reflected in the conditions of approval. I do, however, understand that the applicant would not have a problem with using the word approval there if you want to make that change. Furthermore, the conditions indicate that the plans entitled Emeryville Public Market Parcel B Revised Development Plan submitted by Howerton Sheets 1 to 52 dated December 3rd, 2019 are the approved plans. That's what it says in our recommended conditions. Therefore, the artwork would be required to be placed as depicted on those plans, assuming the council approves the conditions assuming you recommend, the council approve the conditions that we're recommending. The council never expressed any concern for an equal level of artistic treatment on both the east and west elevations, as Wareham's council has suggested should be the case. And concerning possible inconsistencies in the conditions regarding public art, the only possible such inconsistency could be the last sentence of condition Roman numeral 2C4, which states, if the city determines that public art has not been installed as confirmed by the city council or the development agreement complied with, applicants shall be required to pay the in lieu public art fee in full. That sentence was really intended as a safeguard, but it could be deleted if you wanted to do so. Concerning their point number 4, ensuring that the trash enclosures will be relocated inside the building, I think there is a big misunderstanding here. The trash enclosures are located inside the building. They always have been located inside the building. In the previous FDP that the commission approved in January and again in May, they were located inside the building. They are located inside the building in this iteration as well. The appellant's attorney cites a rectangular object at grade that is shown in a variety of the plans. That's true. There is a rectangular object there. That is supposed to be a trash truck. Unfortunately, it's not labeled, but it shows the location where a trash truck would park when they are collecting the trash from inside the building. It is not a trash enclosure. And there's nothing in the reference conditions, which are, by the way, are standard city conditions, which would contravene the drawings, which clearly indicate that all the trash areas are inside the building. Concerning the point number 5, requiring the valet program to be conducted entirely inside the building, we do have a recommended condition of approval that says any use of the public right-of-way for valet parking shall be subject to all applicable city approvals, including but not limited to a review by the Transportation Committee. I would note that Transportation Committee review is a recommendation to the City Council, so ultimately the City Council would have to approve it under our standard procedures. I would also note that that condition of approval was in the previous FDPs that were approved by the Planning Commission as well. Finally, confirming the height of rooftop elements, which is point number 6. They cite a provision in the current planning regulations that limits rooftop elements to 15 to 25 feet above the roof level. As staff has previously noted, PUDs that were approved prior to the adoption of the current planning regulations are not subject to the current planning regulations. This is a PUD that was approved in 2008, so it's not subject to the current planning regulations. However, even if it were, there is another section of the planning regulations, section 94202C5, that stipulates that the limits listed in this section related to both projection height and horizontal area coverage may be exceeded upon the granting of a minor conditional use permit. The City Council's approval of an FDP would supersede the need for a minor conditional use permit to exceed the heights of rooftop elements. And that concludes the staff response to this letter. Be happy to respond to any questions.
Thanks, Charlie. So at this point, I want to open up for questions from the commission to staff. Commissioner Donaldson?
Regarding the condition of approval that you said was a safeguard for the public art, that the in lieu fee might be paid instead of the art being installed.
Right.
That sounds like the building could be occupied without the art being installed.
Well, right, and that's not likely. So that's why I'm saying that sentence could be struck.
Okay.
I don't think we really need it. So if your recommendation to the council is to strike that sentence, we can certainly do that.
And that's found in 2C4?
That's right. Let's see. That is on page 4 of 23 of the conditions of approval, which are kind of towards the back, about 2/3 of the way through your rather thick packet.
Great. Are there any other questions for staff? Commissioner Young?
Yeah, I just, number 2, which is kind of question on the accessibility. Has the fire department looked at how this is going to work in terms of egress, and also in terms of having that access from the deck, from the building inside to that deck itself? Will there be, when you bring public up there, will there be like a way to prevent people from actually getting inside? Is there an issue where access would be dealt with in that level?
Well, there is an issue with that. I mean, I think that's part of the applicant's concern, is that the way they currently have it designed, the public would have to access the roof deck through the office that was on the 6th floor, unless they were to build an additional elevator that would only access that roof deck. And yes, the fire marshal has looked at it. He has, I believe he said that it's okay as it is now for egress, except that he would like the stairs that were in the middle of the building that are not in the current plans to be restored. But as far as the roof deck itself is concerned, as long as it's not publicly accessible, he is okay with it as it is now. If it were to be made publicly accessible, it would have to have an elevator.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, are there any further questions here from the commissioners? All right, seeing no questions at this moment, we want to invite the applicant up for a presentation.
Good evening, commissioners. Nice to see you all again. Unlike Charlie, though, I've enjoyed working with you all, but I hope I don't have to come back in 2020. As Maru mentioned, this project has been approved twice by this body. We've felt and continue to feel that was a great plan, but in the interest of moving this thing along in the best interest of the community and ourselves to get this project approved and started, over the last several months, we undertook a lot of study to both respond to the City Council's concerns about this project, as well as the appellant Wareham Development's concern. And in that light, we took it upon ourselves to reduce the width of the building so that we could increase the view corridor for Emeryville West. We added notches, we added setbacks to answer those concerns. We also, as it relates to concern about art, we voluntarily agreed to have the City Council approve the final selection. We also listened to the City Council's concern about parking, and we reduced the parking number by over 10% to meet those goals. As it relates to the roof deck, unlike what Wareham's council said in their letter about the fact that we've saved costs on parking so we could afford any additional cost, I don't think he's really a cost estimator. I think he's an attorney. The fact of it is that while we've cut back on the parking, we've had to add another floor to get back on the square footage. So that adds a cost for the core, elevators, bathrooms and such, additional set of those. And also we've lost rentable area, and we've lost the cost to add more glazing for the same amount of square footage. And perhaps most importantly, we have spent over $5 million for that great Christie Park the community enjoys. And so we think that is a great contribution to the city, and we are concerned about adding further additional costs to make this available to the public, and also very concerned about how to protect against security issues at that high level, which doesn't have eyes on it all the time like the Wareham Park does. So with that, I'd like to ask our architect, Christopher Peasy, to come up and give you a quick run through.
Thanks, Mark. It's good to be back. I almost want to apologize for being back, but that's the circumstances that have brought us back. And I want to thank Charlie and Maru for doing such a great job in presenting our project and really giving an overview of the current project status. Our team is all here. We're ready to answer questions not just of the current scheme, but how we got to this scheme. And I'll just sort of hit some of the highlights. As they said, the project is still about 150,000 feet of laboratory office space, about 500 cars, which is a number that we reduced to. We've got ground floor commercial retail. And this scheme, I know it's going to look significantly different than a plan that you all thought was pretty good back in January, and that we've come back every couple months to talk about. We've gotten a lot more feedback from a lot more parties, from city staff, from third parties, from city council a couple times. And this slide is also in our presentation, and it really just summarizes what some of those comments were. They were comments about wanting to reinforce transit, so reducing parking, adjusting the massing, potentially for view corridors, adding some more articulation to the building to be more consistent with the PDP. integrating the public art, which I'll get back to, and wind, which we've had sort of lots of wind consultants look at, and we're going to follow up here. The City Council, and as Maru and Charlie have mentioned, did ask us to look at a few things in particular. I think the trash collection is pretty much sorted. Trash is stored inside. It's brought out when it's collected, just like most places. We did look at public art, and as has been said, we're completely on board for City Council approval as part of that process. For both the east and west sides of the building, which we are, it is our intent to go to our short list of artists and propose the entire base of the building, potentially higher, and see what they come back with. We don't expect them to cover the entire base on either side, but we do expect that they'll come back with some great ideas that we can implement. The roof deck, there are kind of two items for the roof deck. One was the design of the roof deck. And the City Council asked that we, or wanted a condition that we comply with condition of approval 3A, 3C, which basically is about the design of the roof deck. They want it to be a great place to be. It should have wind blocking elements and trellises and planting and places to sit. And we're confirmed. We're totally on board with that. It's exactly what we want to do anyway. We've also gotten some feedback on the technical side that we probably need another stair. This is a preliminary layout, which is further developed from the scheme that was in the package that you had previously. So we're looking at that. This preliminary, but it's underway. The second is, so that's the second egress. The second item was about the roof deck access. And I think there are kind of two key points with this. One is that, as you all know, the city has mechanisms for creating public space. You have your general plan, you do development agreements, development bonuses. For example, Christie Park was part of the development agreement, so was the Bridge Walk, which gets you from the east to west side. The Emery Station Terrace was part of a development bonus. So both of those were within your city mechanisms for having public space. Public space does not get created necessarily when someone says, "Oh, let's make that piece of property public. Wouldn't that be great?" That's not one of your mechanisms. But the other issue that Charlie mentioned was about the connectivity of your amenities, and that a space midway up an office building that's not connected to anything else is not really a great place. It's not a destination that people are going to go to. You do have some really great places that people really do want to go when they're eating their lunch, when they're getting coffee, when they're on breaks. We've got Christie Park at one end. We've got the 62nd Street Plaza. We've got little green plazas at either end of our new building, along with the Bridge Walk. And in this diagram, I think you can see that the public market district is filled with a mix of private spaces and public spaces. And Parcel A is a good example where it does have the Bridge Walk, which was part of the DA, public space. It's on a network of public spaces. But then the two residential courtyards are common public spaces. Those are for the residents. They're not for everybody. So there is that division, which is very normal and part of the mechanisms that you all follow here. With that, I'm going to sort of conclude my bit, and we have some wind consulting responses, which was also a lingering concern.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to talk about the wind measurement that we did on the roof terraces. You can see the model here. We placed 5 measurement sensors on the adjacent building and then 6 on the new building here. You can see those black dots and then plus some landscaping on the roof. And then we measured existing conditions without the new building. You can see those 5 sensors. And there's only one criterion here for wind is the numbers in EIR is 30 miles per hour for 1 hour per year. And as you can see, if you exceed the 36 miles per hour, you can get a red dot, and then this all white. So that means all the locations pass that criteria for existing condition. When we're at the new building, there are 11 locations, and they all pass that 36 miles criteria. And also we look at wind comfort condition for reference purposes. And you can see, they are all in the color of yellow. It's right in the middle there. So they didn't exceed the 11 miles per hour criterion for comfort. And then this is the same for the future conditions with the new building in place. And if you like numbers, actually, you can look at this table that's in your report there, and you can see the numbers. At this column for wind hazard, the limit, as I said, is 36, and then no number is above 36. And this number is 11, and then nothing is above 11. So that's condition. There's a correction I had to make here. Is in the table in your report, I correct the numbers from 1 to 11, but in the figures, because we measured 45 sensors on the ground, so all those figures start with from 46 to 56. So 46 to 56 in the table, in the figures are same as 1 to 11 in the table, but the conclusion here is the new building will not create any negative impact, and then no locations will exceed the safety or comfort criterion. That's my conclusion here.
Thank you. All right. You got it.
Good evening, Chelsea McLean. I'm a partner at Holland & Knight. I have only one point to add in response to the letter received today, and that's in response to one of the specific suggestions on the art. There was a suggestion that an equal amount of funding is spent on the east facade as the west facade, and as Charlie mentioned, we have not, as we understand, heard from either the Planning Commission or the City Council that there's a desire for that. We also wanted to point out some of the constraints, particularly on the east side. It's hard to imagine having art with lighting and other impacts onto the railroad tracks and otherwise. So we believe there's a number of constraints on that east side where it wouldn't make sense necessarily to have the same art as it would on the west side. Especially on the west side, we think that there's opportunities for a lot of draw to the rest of the district. And we also note that the Art Commission that approved the public art plan approved a budget of greater funding on the west facade as the east facade. We also understand there was a member of the Wareham team that was on the Art Commission. And with that, we think that we'd like to leave the proposal of the art to be determined by the artists, and as we said, are fully in support of having the City Council approve the proposals. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I want to open up for questions from the commission to the applicant. Nope. No questions?
No.
All right. So at this point, we're going to open up for public comment. I have one comment card here. If you'd like to speak on behalf of this item, please submit a card here. At this point, I'm going to open it up for public comment for this public hearing to Matt Francois. My apologies. Just a reminder, you have 3 minutes here to address the commission, and at that point, we'll listen to your comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair Guerrero and members of the commission. Matt Francois, Rattan and Tucker on behalf of Wareham Development. Sincerely appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. We also want to take this opportunity to thank the applicant for the substantial revisions that they made to the project plans, to the City Council for embracing those plans, and for you for providing a supplemental review to the council on them. So we did have some comments and questions that were put forth in a letter to you today. I appreciate the confirmation from staff that the trash enclosures will be inside the building. and also pointing out to us that there's a condition on the valet program. So I just want to focus my comments really on public access and public art. Starting with public access, this was an item that was mentioned by at least 3 of the council members specifically as something they saw as would be a desirable amenity to be provided as part of this project, and asked all of you to review this item and make a recommendation. So the 2 issues that were raised by the applicant as to why it's not feasible to do it were logistics and economics. On logistics, it's shown that this was done on Emery Station West quite successfully. It's done in San Francisco and a lot of other communities also quite well. In terms of the 60-foot height being an impediment, the Salesforce Park is probably roughly about that feet in terms of height, so it's not an impediment in terms of providing a public accessibility to an area that's at about that level. And I'm certainly not suggesting that it would be provided at the same level of detail or design as Salesforce Park, but it's logistically feasible to do it and has been done on other properties. On economic feasibility, Mr. Steffen is right. I'm an attorney, not an economist. But essentially the argument as to why you couldn't put public accessibility on the terrace was because it would cost too much to provide an elevator or stairs to it. The cost that was provided by the applicant, not by me, was $1.5 million. In a project that's 60, 80 million or dollars more in value, that level of additional cost does not make it economically feasible. The test is, would a reasonable person not go forward with this project because of that additional cost? A 1% to 2% increase in the cost of a project is not going to make it economically infeasible. And that's presuming that you do a new elevator and stairs. There's no reason why the elevator and stairs provided as part of the building couldn't also double and provide access to the terrace as well. So I just want to leave you with that thought, because it was something, again, that 3 of the council members thought would be a nice feature. Mayor Medina in particular referenced the fact that it could be a nice spot for people that are going to the food court to have lunch. In closing, I appreciate the applicant confirming that the public art would be approved and the other clarifications that were made in that regard. We understand the constraints in terms of not having equal levels of treatment, but we'd like that the east side not be ignored and be treated importantly, perhaps not in terms of dollar figures, but as importantly as the west side, because of it serving as a substitution for the mitigation measures on articulation that are the applicant's not having to comply with. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. All right. Are there any other members of the public that would like to comment on this agenda item? All right. I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing. At this point, we want to open it up to deliberation from the commission. And I'll start.
Can I actually ask one more question to staff?
Of course. We have a question to staff from Vice Chair Thompson.
Just regarding the public access to private space, do we as the city have a mechanism for that sort of POPO's treatment that San Francisco uses, or do we not as a city? Are we different than San Francisco?
Well, we are certainly different from San Francisco. I'm not really familiar with San Francisco's mechanism. We do have some provisions about POPOS, P-O-P-O-S, privately owned public open space, in our planning regulations. In fact, I believe the open space requirements for commercial development does include a certain amount of POPOS. Once again, I would reiterate that these planning regulations do not apply to PUDs that were approved in 2008. So this PUD is subject to the ordinance that approved it and the regulations that were in effect at that time. If this were a brand new project, then there probably would be a POPOS requirement, but there is no such requirement in the PUD.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Charlie. Are there any more questions at this point? All right, so we're opening up to deliberation. I'll begin here on my right with Commissioner Young.
This is deliberations, okay. that 60 foot seems really tall. I mean, just, I have issues with, having a public elevator there and going up and down with that. And I have issues with, even if you have a stair, just the graffiti and the garbage and people bringing food up there and just having to have a way to keep it sanitary. It's a little bit of a hike. I do like the fact of having a garden on the top, though. It does actually look really great. If there was a way to make it so, that was the one big one on me, and I would be one who would really like the idea of having art on all four sides of it, just being the fact that it could be something that would be really strong and bring something really great. You have all those new apartments that are coming down on the east side going toward, it isn't just one side, it's really a couple of them. The other, I think, public space is really great. It's an advantage to a city. It's a neat thing, and everybody leaves with a really positive thing. The market is a fantastic place. I mean, just this. I think about, so you buy food in the market and you have this really fabulous marketplace, and then you're buying food, and then what do you go out the double door and you walk across this parking lot? I mean, walk across the street and you hike 5 floors up with food in your hand, and then you get up there, and then you haul it back down as garbage, or do you leave it up there? Is there a way? I mean, still, it's questions. Just even the logistics of that, or do you hop onto an elevator and you ride the elevator to the top, and then you get out and you open up this door, and so I just have, that's kind of the thing I have with that whole concept. So,
Thank you, Commissioner Young. Commissioner Thompson, or I'm sorry, Donaldson.
I want to say that I think that the project looks much better than it did the last time around, even though we approved it the last time around. I think that the openings and the gaps and the visual corridors that are created are better, and that the ground space with the more space between the buildings is better. And I think that altogether those elements are much better than the original PUD, which had a solid wall going across. I do agree that the council should approve the art. I think that the reference to paying in lieu fees instead should just be taken out, because I don't think it's necessary. And on the valet parking, I think it would be great if the Bike and Ped Committee looked at it, as well as the Transportation Committee. Regarding the privately owned public open space, I think that this city can use as much open space as we can get. I think that the buildings that are coming together on the site are going to they cast a lot of shadows on the existing public space, on the streets and that. A lot of the popos in San Francisco are sun terraces. They're on top of buildings or mid-level of buildings that are places where people can go and have their lunch in the sun. And I don't know how extensively it was looked at. I mean, looking at the plans, there's an elevator on the north side of the building, the center of the building, and stairs on the south side. Whether the north side elevator could just be flipped to the south side inside the building, and there are ways to do secure entrances and exits so that the public could get out on the terrace level and employees could keep going up and down to where they need to go. And I was just wondering whether that's been looked at as a feasible alternative to allow the public to access that space.
Thank you. All right, so we're moving on to Commissioner Keller.
Okay, well, I appreciate the work you guys have done. I'm looking forward to someday seeing this building built and then the apartments built beyond that, because we know nothing can happen on A until we get something on B, and so it's holding up the whole project. So I really feel it's unfortunate that we're here almost a year later, we haven't broken ground, and for what reason. I have a couple questions on the staff report. We didn't talk about the building and its new iteration at all, finishes and et cetera. And in the staff report on page 6, it mentions stone cladding, but everything in the drawings I find says metal cladding. So can someone tell me what the building is going to be finished like other than glass? So can someone come up to the podium and let us know to me it looks like it's going to be glass and steel, and so and concrete.
Yeah, at the upper levels, we expect it to be metal with glass primarily, and at the lower levels, we expect it to be more masonry, like at the storefront
At the
area,
storefronts, okay.
some combination of stone, precast stone, or tile.
Okay.
And
okay.
that's somewhere buried in the long report, and
Yeah.
it just hasn't risen to the level of something that we all needed to talk about.
Okay, and then also, if you could stay up there, I don't know if we can show the plans. So the current approved FDP shows a center recess with the lobby in the center, and I really liked that element. It kind of broke up the thing. It gave it some height and some weight that brought your eye forward or up to the building. And I realize now it's shifted a little bit, and that the entrance lobby is one bay to the south. Is there no way to do one of two things? Bring your entry bay over to line up with that, or do some kind of glass element to cover the parking structure and continue that glass element up to where you have it now, so at least there's still a continuing of uprising there. It's just really broken up, and it kind of just, the building has lost whatever interest it had to me.
Yeah, well,
You know what I'm talking about? Can you visualize it?
I do. I mean, I think the general response is the building's a lot different. It's been push and pulled a lot from all the input, the year of input and massaging that we've done. There was a time when marking the center of that building was really important. And marking the lobby at that center was really important. As we manipulated everything to conform more with the PDP and the notching strategy, what happened was when you combine that with making the whole building, we took about a quarter of it away, which moved all of those centers, so sort of none of those alignments were happening anymore. However, we did still want to get the lobby in proximity to the crosswalk, which has always been an important desire line. So the other moment is that we used to have the flexibility of a much bigger garage, which allowed us to notch in a way that we thought really helped the massing. As we were asked to sort of make parking more difficult for future patrons, we consolidated the garage, and we lost some of that flexibility to be creative with the massing. The other component is that we were trying to keep the base as flexible as we can as we're courting kind of artist ideas for what to do there. So we didn't want to have any projections out further from the garage, which would go into the public right-of-way.
Okay, so I know we're not making design changes. If that element can be brought down through the parking structure and be made whole again or something, that would be desirable. Certainly not something I'm going to make as a condition of approval, but it's just kind of hanging there, and the bottom just doesn't relate to the top anymore, and it's just kind of unfortunate. And I understand the what you guys have gone through. So I think that's all that I have for that. So in regard to the valet parking, I think we need to approach that as it comes about. It needs to go to the Transportation Committee. I like the idea of it going to the Bike Bed Committee, of course. I think almost everything nowadays that comes up with transit needs to go to both the transportation and the bike ped. I think that needs to start becoming, and because once again, I'm pushing their thought that bicycles and pedestrian are a form of transit before their recreation and exercise, that it is transit, so we need to look at it that way. So I wholly support that. We need to have that all looked at. The pole post up on the 6th floor is totally a waste of, I totally respect that we need more parks and green space, but we need space that's usable, that people are going to use. And if you look at the little park across from Novartis, or what now is Biomed, that place is never used. And for that little space to be compared to either Emeryville West or Emeryville East is just ludicrous, because Emeryville West and East are through passages. They go somewhere. They come from somewhere. They're off one level off of the street, and still those places aren't used. I go through them a lot, even during the week, on the weekends. I go through them a lot, and they are rarely used. What's used? Christie Park. That thing is a resounding success. I just can't believe when I go through there how successful that park is. It's that grade. It's easy to access. People will use that. A 6th floor park, no one is going to go up to. So to put that onus on this developer after we've put them through so many hoops to please Wareham Development is just beyond me. And I cannot support a resolution or any motion to the city council that adds that as a requirement. And to compare it to Salesforce, Salesforce is a destination. It is not a small little lab building in a small little city. That's almost 5 acres. So to compare that to this spot, that's just pushing the bounds beyond of any reasonable consideration. So I think that I can't support any onus on the developer to make that a public open space. I like that it's there, that the people in the building will be able to use it. It's open space, it's green. But to make that as public, it's just not very usable space. And I think that's all I have at the time. I could come back.
Thank you, Commissioner Keller. All right, Vice Chair Thompson.
Yeah, I wanted to again thank the applicant for coming forward and going through this process. I did want to just note in terms of the reasonable consideration question around public access, because to launch off your comments, is that the interesting thing is that I've heard a lot of conversations about why this should be public open space, but the ones that I find resonant are the ones about sunlight. There is a solar study in this without a caption. This could have been an opportunity to talk about sunlight and this space. And the one about the ped route, that really open space that is occupied and utilized in a public way readily by a mix of people on routes that are usable. Those are sort of resonant urban ideas. So I would encourage all projects to think about these ideas. But in terms of this project, I would not make this a requirement of this project. I don't think we have the mechanism, and I think that it is not on a direct route, and so I agree with staff in that regard. So I think in terms of that public access, I would not make that part of a condition. In terms of the art conversation, I too wanted to strike the language because I didn't want anyone, I know it was a fail-safe, but I didn't want anyone to misinterpret and think they could pay the fee rather than doing the art. I think the art is essential. I also think that the idea that there is a public face and a secondary face, particularly with the rail line there, I think that is appropriate. So I would not support equalizing the funding. I think it is good the way it is. In terms of the height limit, I actually when I went through the conditions, I sort of had the same reaction to having no limit to the tops of things on the top of the building. From the conversation tonight, it seems like that is the condition of this situation, that it's really determined about the top of the top floor, and then there is no cap on the penthouse. And I've sort of, when I read it, I immediately sort of said, that's a little bit odd. Height is such a sensitive topic. So I don't think it should relate to this project, but in terms of how we do our conditions and the ability to kind of really actually know what the height of the building is, I think that is an important element to have in conditions. So I would also like to say that in terms of the applicant and putting up with the process, I do actually think you've resulted in a better project. I did want to note that the proportionality and the massing and the notching has actually made the proportions better. There is a bit of a loss in terms of that continuity down to the street, but I think overall this is a great project and should go forward.
Great. Thank you, Vice Chair Thompson. All right, so for staff, can we have the recommendation up here on our computers just so we can start to look at that and have that in front of us?
The 6 points that the council wants us to consider.
Yes.
While we're doing that, there are a couple more comments. I did want to also strike that
Go ahead.
language in the art thing, I think. And I did want to address the fact that this commission has over and over again said that the east side needs to be treated equally or as well. So I don't think there's any chance that we're going to let that east side, or that council is going to let that east side look like a secondary thing. And then one last thing on the park. The attorney did mention that there were 3 council members that wanted or liked the idea of this park. That's a majority. If the council really wanted this, they had a majority to put that on this as part of our requirements, and they did not. So I just want to keep that in everybody's mind, that the council didn't make this and they had the majority. If it's true what he was saying, that 3 of them approved that, they didn't make it a condition. They had a majority in order to do that.
Thank you, Commissioner Keller. All right, and so while we're getting the points up here, my notes here, I agree with my fellow commissioners. The design that we're looking at today is much improved compared to what we approved in the past. And so while I know that this has been a lengthy process, sometimes when you take a longer time, you end up with a better result. And I think that's what's happened at this point. So I do appreciate the flexibility and compromise that's happened from the applicant's side. So I want to applaud you for that. And I think that hopefully the neighbors will be happy with the design that we see today. In terms of some of the points that we're addressing tonight.
Excuse me, is this the slide you were talking about?
I was mostly looking at the recommendation that we have on that we'd like to make today. At the slide that shows there we go, just that.
Well, okay, this is what the city attorney was commenting on, that it's not exactly what we're doing.
Got it. And so in terms of this here, what are we changing on this?
Well, if you look at the proposed resolution in the packet, to walk you through it, it sets out the recitals that we typically do. And then one of the issues is still making the recommendation that the EIR applies to this revised design. And so it sets out the resolves that are required for that, addressing the revised environmental checklist, and then also the Kimley Horn study. And then it goes on to say that the Planning Commission finds there is substantial evidence in the administrative record to support the following findings. Normally what would happen is the Planning Commission makes those findings in supporting its recommendation to the City Council. So it's slightly different, but the findings largely track the previous findings that have been made. And then what we could do is add some resolves at the end of this that address the specific council questions. That PowerPoint slide that Charlie you had up a minute ago with the art, we can walk through that, and we could just add specific resolutions.
Yeah,
Or resolve, sorry, not.
This item is a bit of an anomaly. The commission has, in my tenure in Emeryville, we have not had this kind of a thing before the commission previously. It's a supplemental report. This has been referred to you by the City Council for a supplemental report. That's the language of the planning regulations, and that's what they did. So what you are doing is giving them a supplemental report. You're not technically making recommendations, except on the things that they asked you to make recommendations about. So that's why the city attorney is kind of, agonizing over exactly how this is worded in the resolution.
Thank you so much for that clarification. I think that we have a comment here from Commissioner Keller.
Just a question. So we have a resolution in front of us.
Yes.
We usually vote on a resolution.
Yes. we
Okay,
would ask
so
you
we're
to do
going
that.
to we're going to do that. We're going to
Yes.
send a resolution forward to City Council.
Correct.
Okay. And in this current resolution, those 6 items that they had put on that list are not part of this resolution. We'd have to add that to it, which makes it kind of funny that if
I would note that the findings, for example, as Andrea said, it doesn't say the commission makes these findings. It says we think they could be made, and here's why. But also on a number of these points, they are addressed in the conditions of approval. And the conditions of approval are attached to this resolution, and basically presumably, if you vote to approve this, you will be sending a report to the City Council saying, here are conditions of approval that we would suggest you use for this project. So we don't necessarily need to have a resolved on each of the issues that the council asked for recommendation on, as long as they're addressed in the conditions of approval. But whether or not the roof deck is open to the public, I don't believe is.
Well, what about striking that language on the art in lieu?
Yes, that's in
Do
the
that.
conditions of approval. I actually have some notes here on what I've heard in your discussion that you would like modified in these conditions.
Okay.
And then we're also suggesting a new resolved in the resolution regarding the roof deck.
Okay.
Okay,
Right?
Great.
that sounds fair.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to continue on with my comments, and then we'll wrap it up. And so, in terms of the roof terrace, while I do enjoy public spaces, I don't know that this is a space where that makes the most sense. There's plenty of space in the nearby neighborhood, including Christie Park, which I live directly across the street from, that I would love to see the community use. And it's being used every day that I pass through it. It's really livened up the neighborhood. I see ground level being really where we can activate the neighborhood, and that makes more sense to me. In terms of the city council approving the art that's on the building, I am in agreement with that. I'd like to see the city council make the final approval for that. It sounds as though there's no problem on the applicant side for that. I don't believe that the budget should be equal on both sides. As some of the commissioners have stated, we all have vocally said that we'd like to see treatments on both sides, the east and west. I believe the west side is the most visible side for the public, and at some point we may find that that's where a lot of the budget will have to be spent to make that happen. And so I'd hate to be locked into an equal budget for both when we know that the Shell Mountain side is going to be the piece that most people come to visit. That said, I agree with my commissioners, the valet element. I'd like to see that also be presented to the Transportation Committee as well as the Bike and Ped Advisory Committee. Those are my comments. So this is an action item. And so at this point, are there any more comments from commissioners before we move forward with next steps?
Just wanted to mention to the Wareham guys that I hope they're like the notch that is now being placed, that this building does have an opening, gives us some airspace is in terms of the massing. I think that's a huge improvement to the overall place of this. And for the guys that did the market work on that, you guys did a great job even following that up. So thank you.
All right. So are there any commissioners here that would like to make a recommendation?
I think we need to hear from staff on what we're
Okay.
putting together.
Let me just say what I've heard you say concerning recommended changes. I've heard three modifications to the conditions of approval. One is on page 3, which is Roman numeral 2B1, and that would just add the words "and approve" concerning the city council's on the public art. It would say, prior to the issuance of the building permit, the city council shall review and approve the public art proposed to be installed on the exterior of the building. Next, on page 4, condition Roman numeral 2C4, delete the last sentence that says, if city determines that public art has not been installed as confirmed by the city council or development agreement complied with, applicant shall be required to pay the in lieu public art fee in full. We would just strike that sentence. And then on page 15, condition Roman numeral 6C3, concerning valet parking, we would say any use of the public right-of-way for valet parking shall be subject to all applicable city approvals, including but not limited to a review by the BPAC and Transportation Committee. And then staff would recommend adding a resolved. No? Not now? All right.
With respect to some of the other issues, for example, the east-west treatment, and then also whether this roof deck should be open to the public, what we could do is summarize the commission's consensus on that for the city council.
Oh, and not put it in the resolution? All right, if that's acceptable to the commission. I'm
any-
hearing a consensus, by the way, of not having the roof deck be accessible to the public, although it's not unanimous. And what was the other issue? Oh, the art,
east-west.
the east-west art treatment, yes. I believe you have a consensus that that would not be equal on both sides.
Would it not be better to have those in the conditions rather than a consensus?
We can add them.
I myself, I'd prefer to have them in
Okay.
writing.
All right, well, I don't know exactly where those would go offhand, but we can certainly capture those in the conditions if you wish. So we'd have a condition that roof deck does not need to be open to the public, and that the art treatment does not need to be equal on both sides. Were there any other issues that we missed?
Charlie, for the last piece that you just mentioned, the art treatment, I don't know that that speaks really to the, like, what's in question here. Maybe be more specific about the cost that's,
The budget for
yeah,
the art?
exactly.
Yeah, okay.
So
Right.
like, would you say like 15% would happen to go on the one side versus the other one?
I don't know that we have to prescribe that at this point, but just, yeah. Okay,
Yeah, just say it doesn't have to be equal.
yeah,
I think that's adequate.
got it.
Would it not be what was identified as the 750K, the 250K?
Probably. That was in the public art master plan?
Yeah,
Yes.
okay.
So do you want to use that as the guideline, the public art?
Or do you
master
want to
plan?
use the
But it
artist as the
already
guide,
is,
the
isn't
artist
it?
himself as the
But
guideline?
we need one commissioner at a time. Does anybody want to speak on that?
Would you want to consider the artist being the guideline?
Well, I wanted to follow up on my question, is that if 750 and 250 is already in the record,
Right.
can we just refer to it?
I don't think you even need to do that.
Okay.
I mean, just let me say that the public art master plan for this project, per the development agreement, was to have been vetted by the Public Art Committee 3 times, which they did, and they made a recommendation to approve it. And it also had to be reviewed and approved, I believe, by the Transportation Committee for any artwork that was going to be in the public right-of-way. And there was one piece that was to be in the public right-of-way, and so the Transportation Committee reviewed it, and they did approve it as well. Ultimately, according to the development agreement, it is the Community Development Director who ultimately approves the master plan. I have not done so yet,
Okay.
because I'm waiting for this process to play itself out. And once that's played out, I intend to approve the master plan, and it does include those numbers in there that you referenced.
Okay.
Thank you, Charlie.
Sure.
All right. So looking at my fellow commissioners here, are there any other changes or recommendations we'd like to make to this? Oh,
If not, I'd motion approval.
all right. We have a motion from Commissioner Keller. We have a second.
I'll second it.
Seconded from Vice Chair Thompson. All right.
Hang on. Sorry, need my crib sheet.
Can we have a?
Commissioner Barrera
Yep.
is absent. Commissioner Donaldson,
Aye.
Commissioner Keller,
Aye.
Commissioner Sohane is absent, Commissioner Young,
Aye.
Vice Chair Thompson,
Aye.
and Chair Guerrero.
Aye.
All right, 5 ayes. We will convey your supplemental report as you have prescribed to the City Council.
Great.
Thank you.
Can we take a break?
Yes. Let's call recess for 5 minutes. All right. All right. So we are ending recess at this point and continuing on with our agenda for this evening. At this point, we're going to continue on to item number 8. This is the Hilton appeal of Hilton Garden Inn, and I want to invite Navarre up for a presentation.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair. Good evening, Commission. As stated, this is an appeal of the Hilton Garden Inn, consideration of a minor conditional use permit to convert existing storage and meeting rooms into guest rooms. So here's the location of 1800 Powell Street where the Hilton Garden Inn is. This is on the west side of the freeway, right next to the gas station. So for project timeline, in June of this year, a minor conditional use permit application was submitted. In September, it was approved, and within the 15-day appeal period, appeal was submitted to the director on the decision. And on December 5th, there was a corrected approval letter issue. It came to staff's attention that there was an error in the approval letter, but it had no bearing on the findings on the decision on anything that you're considering tonight. It's just noted as part of the timeline. So the overview for this minor conditional use permit is to convert existing meeting rooms on the top, which is the 14th floor, into 23 new guest rooms, and to convert storage space on the 2nd floor into 2 new guest rooms. There's no exterior building modifications as part of this project, so there's no design review involved. So this wasn't really mentioned in the appeal, but just so you have a context of what the whole project is. Up here is existing floor plan, and there's some storage space on that floor, and it's proposed to be converted to 2 new guest rooms. And then there's an existing ballroom on the 14th floor. There's a food prep area. There's other meeting rooms. And then the proposal is to have that changed into 23 new guest rooms. So the required findings for this, there's 5 required findings. The appellant has raised issue with the findings for D. The proposed use at its proposed location will provide a service or facility that will contribute to the general well-being of the surrounding neighborhood or community. Staff's finding for that was that the proposed guest rooms will contribute to the economic vitality and general well-being of the community by providing additional guest rooms within an existing hotel building. The appellant is stating that the additional rooms will not contribute to the general well-being of the surrounding neighborhood or community, that the loss of the ballroom will be detrimental to the Emeryville and the community at large, and the loss of the facility that holds nonprofit groups, birthdays, anniversary, weddings, other important events, repeat conferences, that there's no comparable facilities in the city, and that it will also eliminate well-paying union jobs in the food and beverage department. So for your action this evening, you have 3 choices: to affirm the decision to the director and dismiss the appeal based on a determination that the facts do not warrant a further hearing. Alternatively, you could set a date for a public hearing on the appeal, or you could remand the matter to the director to cure a deficiency. Staff's recommendation is that the Planning Commission review the appeal, and to do that, to set a hearing date on January 23rd next year.
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff at this point from the commission?
Can you go back a slide?
Yes.
What's the difference between 1 and 3?
So 1 is saying there's nothing to change, like it's fine as is. 3 is saying, you know what, there was an error that needs to be corrected, go fix it. But we don't need to do anything about it, you do it.
Okay.
That was really technical terminology I used. I'm sure the attorney would agree with that. Okay.
I think that's what the code says.
Do we have any other questions?
When you mean error, is that just the error in the number that was put on the application?
I'm not sure what you mean by an error in the number.
I can describe what it was. It was the original appeal letter referenced a previous conditional use permit and said that this was a modification to that previous conditional use permit. As it turns out, the previous conditional use permit that was referenced was incorrect. It was for a different hotel in a different location. This hotel does not have a previous conditional use permit. So that reference to that previous conditional use permit was the error that was corrected.
Okay, so if we were to choose item 3, that is just changing that and still assuming that the application is approved?
Right. Right. We've already cured that deficiency.
Okay.
Yeah.
If we hadn't, and it was discovered in the course of your deliberations, then it would probably be appropriate for you to do number 3. But we believe we've already fixed that.
Yeah, and a corrective letter has already been issued, and it's part of the record for this.
Okay, and then one other question is, I'm just curious, so does the tax for hotel rooms differ from tax that we charge to these hotels on conference spaces, like tax the city charges, or?
I can respond to that. I can't tell you what the dollar amount is. I can tell you that hotel rooms are subject to the transient occupancy tax, and when you stay there, you have to pay that tax. Also, the hotel has to pay a business license tax in addition to the transient occupancy tax. The business license tax is based on their gross receipts. So to the extent that they get revenue from a ballroom, a percentage of their gross receipts on that would come to the city through the business license tax. Whether one is larger than the other, I can't say. I would also note that the commission really does not typically consider financial considerations in making decisions.
Okay.
All right. Are there any other questions from commissioners at this point for staff?
I had
Commissioner
the two,
Keller?
Yeah, I had the 2 that you kind of just answered. So I don't know if I was kind of save these for our deliberations, but I think you actually, well, maybe. So is there a condition that the hotel provided event space? Is this required? They're saying this is a benefit to the community. Is this a benefit that was required of the hotel to provide?
Not to our knowledge.
Thank you.
All right. Any further questions? All right. See none. Want to invite the and applicant? No.
Appellate?
Well,
Appellant.
I think
Yeah.
it would be appropriate to hear from both the appellant and the applicant.
You can just open it up for public comment.
You got it. All right. So
And may I just emphasize, Commissioner Chair Guerrero,
Mhm.
that at this point, the commission's decision is only to decide which of these 3 courses of action to take. It's not to debate the merits of the project or the appeal, except to the extent that it helps you decide which course of action to take.
All right.
thank you. All right. So I want to open up to public comment at this point. I have several cards here for speakers. I want to invite up Sonia Carabel to speak. So is Sonia? Are you Sonia?
Yes, I'm Sonia. Sorry.
Okay.
Would it be okay if Elijah spoke first?
I have a request for extra time for Elijah. Is that's a total of 9 minutes if the other people gave their time. I don't know that there's.
So one of the people had to leave, so
Mhm.
I'm actually going to take the 6 minutes, and he's just going to do 3 minutes.
Excellent. Okay. And so Sonia would like to have whose time? Got it. Okay. All right. And so I want to invite up Elijah Escobel to speak.
No, she's not.
Hello, thank you. My name is Elijah. I live in Emeryville, and I've been here for about 7 years. I've been working at the hotel for 15. It was one of the jobs that allowed me to move from Oakland to Emeryville as a well-paying job. I'm asking that you please allow this appeal to move forward to a public hearing. That'd be number 2 to set the date. The proposed renovations on the 14th floor is really what is my appeal. The second floor conversion of some meeting spaces into sleeping rooms is not much of a concern. I have seen lots of events happen here, and weddings, and it is a community benefit because a lot of places get priced out from the city. So if they bring their business to Emeryville. It's also a centralized location close to MacArthur BART. So people that have like high school reunions that are scattered throughout the Bay Area, they fly into Oakland or SFO, and they can get there to our hotel easily. And it's one of the hotels that provides accessible since his lordship is closed. His lordship, we pulled a lot of the business from, it's split between the DoubleTree and if this space were to close, conferences that we currently have would have to be relocated either to Oakland, Marriott, or have to go to the DoubleTree, one of our competitors. The thing says, one of the points is it says it will contribute to the general well-being. and I don't believe that it's consistent with the general plan. I don't think it's a good balance. We still have some space downstairs, but the draw is really the 14th floor with the view of the New Bay Bridge. And it would eliminate quite a few of living wage jobs, not just good union jobs. It would, like my own. And I would like you to hear this appeal in full and move it to a public comment. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So I'd like to invite Sonia Carabel to speak. And at this point, Roberto is giving his time to you for 3 minutes left. And so Chincel.
Yeah,
Got
so
it.
just 6 minutes.
Okay. And just a reminder, this is at this point not a public hearing. And so we can listen to what your comment is. But if at some point it does become a public hearing, then that's another point that we would want to hear from you too. Okay?
Definitely.
Thank you.
Hi, so my name is Sonia Carabel. I'm a researcher with Unite Here Local 2850, which is the union that represents the workers at the Hilton Garden Inn, as well as workers in the hotel, food service, generally hospitality industry around the Bay Area. And we really want to urge you, the Planning Commission, to hear this appeal more fully. I believe that it's a more complicated matter, that it's really been allowed to kind of slide by as just a staff level approval, when I think it really deserves more scrutiny. Though it is a renovation, it's something that's going to fundamentally change the uses at this site, and I think that that really deserves to be looked at carefully. I think that, you know, we've seen that the original approval was something that was a modification to a use permit that actually was never given to this hotel in the first place, and as such, it is a non-conforming use. I mean, you know, non-conforming uses can continue indefinitely. That's not to say that it can't be there, but when there are changes to non-conforming uses, that's something that triggers, you know, extra scrutiny and that triggers new requirements. And so this change, this renovation that would eliminate the ballroom is the substitution of one use, a large community assembly facility, which is a non-conforming use, with a new conditionally permitted use, the hotel, which, you know, would be an expansion of the existing use of parts of the building into this space that has a different use. And so given that this is on a mixed-use non-residential zoning, which requires that sites of more than 1 acre have more than one use on it, this would be changing it from something that complies with that requirement to something that no longer complies with that requirement. There are going to continue to be some small meeting spaces and restaurant on the ground floor. However, those are specifically cited within the code as being ancillary to hotel uses and therefore can be considered part of a larger hotel use. However, this ballroom on the top floor is something that is not just ancillary to the hotel, but rather something that is bringing people in from the community, that there's all sorts of people that are having, you know, quinceañeras, weddings, all sorts of events where the people are not necessarily guests in the hotel, but rather are coming in from the larger Bay Area. And I believe that as such, it constitutes a separate use that is now being eliminated, and that elimination is something that calls for a major conditional use permit as opposed to the minor conditional use permit, which it originally was approved under, given that the code specifically states that anything that is not specified as a minor conditional use permit needs a major conditional use permit. And nowhere in the code does it say that the conditional use permit to have one use on a multi-use zoning site is minor, therefore I'm assuming it is major. So I know that that's a pretty technical argument, and I am prepared to make that at the public hearing with more details and more code, but I do think that it's important because it is really, we need to consider this as the removal of a very valuable use from Emeryville. There's no comparable site in the city. People are going to have to seek out this use elsewhere. I believe, you know, the general plan in the approval letter specifically says this is going to add to the balance of uses and wide range of economic activity in the city. However, I believe it's doing the exact opposite of that. It's actually taking away a use that, again, there's no ballroom of this size in Emeryville, especially not one with the view that is really a huge draw to this site. And this form of activity is just going to leave Emeryville if we allow this ballroom to close. So again, I would love to discuss this further at a future public hearing on this appeal, and I urge you to approve or to vote the option number 2 and have a public hearing on this decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more members of the public that would like to speak on behalf of this item? All right. Seeing none, I want to go ahead and close public comment. And at this point, we are going to invite the appellant to come up if they'd like.
You mean the applicant?
Applicant? All right. I don't see the applicant. Okay. So we can go ahead and open it up for deliberation from the commission. I'll begin with Commissioner Keller here to my left.
Can I actually ask that you move the slide forward one, because that's our decision, right?
Can you use your microphone?
Sorry. Can I ask that you move the slide forward one? Thank you.
Okay, so in advance, I did ask the director a couple of questions on this, and he did say that we're not to consider this on financial reasons. That was brought up in the letter. So that being said, I'm going to address these financial considerations more directed towards the ballroom use as a public benefit. So first of all, I see this as a business decision and not a land use and planning decision. If the hotel decides to change their business from having parties to having more rooms because they find that's more need, that's not our business to say. And in the letter, they talk about the loss of revenue and how these parties will generate income for the city. I personally don't agree with that. I've gone and used that room before, and when they talk about the Chamber of Commerce meetings, we don't have a Chamber of Commerce, but other chambers could meet there. Other people could have luncheons. Those people come to the space for that event, whether it's a luncheon or a meeting or whatever they do, and then they turn around and they leave. They're not actually going to go to Bay Street after lunch before they go back to work, and they're not actually going to go participate in other restaurants. People staying overnight are going to be here for a longer period of time. They're going to come into our city. They're going to take advantage of the townhouse or Bay Street or a public market or a movie theater. People coming for a wedding at our quinceañera, they're going to come to the party, they're going to get in their car, and they're going to go home. So I don't find that that's a valid excuse or a reason that we would look at this. So, and I understand that there are different jobs, and working for the event space could be a better paying job. I don't know. I don't have those figures. They didn't provide those. But when they add a whole floor of rooms, there's still going to be jobs. They're going to have to add more housekeeping and more security, I would think. So there are still going to be jobs. They may change, and I don't know if they're going to be more or less. But I just think that it's all of this whole thing is not a land use and planning decision, but it's a business decision.
All right. Vice Chair Thompson?
I just had a question about the mix of use requirements for this. I mean, this is a hotel. It is a hotel use. That is where the use consideration comes in, right? This is a staff question.
Well, the speaker, I believe, was referring to the fact that I think it's in the MUN, Mixed Use Non-Residential District. And if a new project were to be proposed on a site in the MUN zone that was more between 1 and 5 acres, then it would be required to have a mix of uses, unless the Planning Commission determined that that was infeasible. But that requirement doesn't apply to existing uses that are being modified. That applies to new development projects.
Okay. Yeah, I think my comment, I am concerned about the limits of our reach. I have the same concerns about whether this is an internal business decision. But that question of does it contribute to the community in the best way possible? If mixed use is the intended use for this area, I think that is a concern in terms of having, really facilitating a mix of uses. So I think I'll just leave my comments at that.
Thank you. Commissioner Donaldson?
I think that it is worth hearing what the appellant has to say in more detail, and I think that the question of how much benefit the ballroom is to the community and the community members is something that is worth hearing. So I would like to see that go forward.
Commissioner Young?
I'm kind of in the same boat as Commissioner Donaldson. I kind of feel that we should bring this up to kind of hear. I'd like to hear more about what these spaces are being used. I've actually never been to the space. I don't know what it looks like. I'd like to see if there's some way to take a better view. If there was a possibility, can someone show me the floor plan on? There was one thing I wanted to make reference to that. Thank you. No, of the proposed. But please stand because may make a reference there. If you look at the center, I guess that's looking towards San Francisco. It's kind of under the letter S in rooms. It's a kind of a large king suite. It kind of mystifies me that they would just make all the units exactly pretty much the same size, except the ones on. I guess they give some corner ones with a little bit more size, but I just kind of then go back to its existing, and you get this really kind of a fabulous space. I mean, if you can spend some money renovation, this could be a fabulous space and it's something worth thinking about. I'd hate to see it just disappear and go into a vapor. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Commissioner Sohane?
So when I look at the appeal, there are 3 or 4 items that stand out. However, as the director mentioned, some of them are outside the purview of Planning Commission. So first is the revenue to the city. So I'm unclear, and obviously Planning Commission shouldn't base their decision on financial reasons. So I'll not get into that, but my question about, if one is a better revenue source to the city versus the other was something that we were looking at, but that's not what Planning Commission is supposed to do. The second concern is about less meeting space. So when I looked at the other, plans that were submitted to it, it seemed like there was an equal amount of conference space available on the lower floor. And there is not enough information, that is present in this appeal about what's the utilization of the 2, if the hotel needs, more amount of space or less amount of space. And that's where I have to resonate with Commissioner Keller's comment about this being more of a business decision rather than a land use planning decision. So without having that additional information, I'm not sure if a decision can be made. Finally, the point about elimination of jobs, it's not exactly elimination of jobs. It can be looked as a substitution of jobs as well, because addition of hotel guest rooms, that to 25 in number, would mean additional number of staff. So there is a lack of clarity in the appeal about if it is being reduced, increased, and it is hard to make any decision on those regard. But stepping back, and if we were to just look at from a land use point of view, then again, as some of my co-commissioners mentioned, this seems like more of a business decision rather than a land use planning decision, and it's difficult to come up with a decision without the lack of adequate information.
Thank you, Commissioner Sohane. All right. So to wrap up my thoughts here, I would prefer the option 2 for us to move forward with this being on the agenda for our January meeting, and I'll save my comments for that if that's the direction that the Commission takes. All right. Are there any other comments that the Commission would like to make at this point?
I just had a quick question for staff, because the recommendation in our packet seems different than the recommendation in the PowerPoint.
It's in a different order.
Oh, they are? Well, the recommendation, regardless of what order it's in, is to set a public hearing on this appeal at your next meeting on January 23rd. That is the staff recommendation.
Did you want to see the slide to make sure they were?
Yeah, no, I actually just wanted to know what the recommendation
Navarre?
was.
That's the recommendation.
Can you place the slide up with the 3 options so we could just have that all in front of us?
And it's also on page 2 of our staff report,
Thank you.
and that's where it varies.
You're not talking about the findings, you're talking
No,
about...
keep going, that one.
Okay, well, let's see.
There we go. This is the one we're looking at.
So it's item 2 here is what we're recommending,
Okay.
because I think that's the order
Correct.
that they're in the planning regulations.
I would move that we set a date for a public hearing on the appeal.
All right, that's moved by Commissioner Donaldson,
I second it.
seconded by Commissioner Young. Charlie, can we have a vote?
Commissioner Barrera is absent. Commissioner Donaldson?
Aye.
Commissioner Keller?
I'd like to vote last if I could, please.
That's fine. Can we? Is that possible, Charlie?
I think that's up to the chair.
That's fine.
Can you
Okay,
explain what that is?
Well, Commissioner Keller typically goes next. I believe this is alphabetical order,
Yes.
and so he wants to vote last.
Oh, okay.
I'm okay with
Change
that.
your last name.
Let's go by first names, okay?
Chair
start with
still
Z.
gets to go last, usually. though. Where were we? Let's see. Commissioner Donaldson voted yes. Commissioner Keller is going last. Commissioner Sohani?
Aye.
Commissioner Young?
Aye.
Vice Chair Thompson?
Aye.
Chair Guerrero?
Aye.
And Commissioner Keller?
I will abstain for voting. I don't support this idea. I would prefer to determine that it doesn't warrant further hearing, but if this is what the majority of the commission has, I don't want to vote no, so I'll abstain from
So
voting.
you would choose option 1 to dismiss.
That would be my choice, but I'm not going to say no.
Thank you.
So abstained, all right.
I just wanted to make sure if there was a core or a majority, that's where it went.
Got it.
Count votes.
I want to make
All
sure I
right,
have
so
enough
we
votes.
have, just to recap, we have 5 ayes and 1 abstention, and we will set this for public hearing on January 23rd.
Thank you, Charlie. All right, so now we're going to move on to item 9.1. This is a study session for the BMR Emeryville Center for Innovation. And it looks like Maru is ready for the presentation here.
It's thirsty in here.
What's up? Want me to do something? I don't quite understand why, but sure.
All right, good evening once again. And unlike the last item, this item is the first time we are going to be seeing. So this is a first study session, and we are here to talk about the Chiron, Novartis, Grifols, and now BMR campus. So the first slide is kind of getting you oriented to what this campus entails. At the bottom of the screen is Hollis Street. It's bounded by Stanford Avenue. You have Horton Street right here, and then there's further, and then you have the railroad tracks right here. Sherwin-Williams property is here, and to the west of it as well. So this is like an existing conditions graphic, and it's just to show you what the extent of the campus is. In terms of background, Chiron Corporation, a biopharmaceutical firm, was founded in Emeryville, and they moved to the old Shell research building on Horton Street in 1985. In 1995, the City Council approved a PUD-PDP, and I'll be referring to that as the Chiron PUD-PDP. And this was the Chiron PDP build-out. It included 14 new buildings, of which 7 were labs, 3 office towers, structured parking, support facilities, and these are to be built over 30 years. After that PDP was approved, in terms of the buildings that did get built, are the ones which are circled in black. So B4, that is the building that has been built, and it is the signature building of the campus of Hollis. Then they also built a parking structure, which is off Horton. And then there was a smaller building, B7A here. The buildings that are encircled in blue, these are proposals and FTP proposals that were approved by the council but were never built. So that would be the B3 and B7B. So now I'm back to the existing conditions again, and just to give you an idea, these were the 3 buildings that got built after the PUD was approved and are consistent with the PUD. And the other buildings that you see in this graphic are essentially, they were existing before the PUD was approved, and they continue to be used as for various lab uses. Then in 2006, Chiron was acquired by Novartis. A few years later, in 2013, the diagnostic unit of Novartis was sold to Grifols. Then earlier this year, in March, Novartis portion was acquired by BMR. So this is a FTP proposal by BMR. So to get the division of buildings between BMR and Grifols, all the numbering in the red is owned by BMR, and that in green is owned by Grifols. This makes it a little bit clearer of what the BMR owned properties are and their location. So you can see that the signature building is part of BMR, but the parking structure is not. This is, again, looking at the BMR properties or the PDP build-out. So basically, the light-colored ones are controlled by BMR. In terms of the scope of the study session today, this is what is being proposed in terms of site, the ones that has blue lines. What they're proposing are 2 new research and development buildings along Hollis and a parking structure along Horton. This is the site plan of the proposed BMR. So these are the 2 buildings. These are the R&D buildings totaling 500,000 square feet of space. And then you have a parking structure accommodating 2,400 parking spaces. And this is kind of the basic details of how tall the various buildings are and the size. So the most exciting part about this project or this proposal is that what they are proposing is they're opening up Chiron Way. Right now there are gates on either end, and it's not accessible to the public. As a part of this FTP, they will be opening this up to all public vehicles. That includes vehicles, pedestrians, as well as bicyclists. So this kind of shows the pedestrian circulation. And as you can see, you know, the pedestrian, this is an interesting one because people do walk the shortest possible walk, and they will be clearly allowing it and making this campus truly accessible to everybody in terms of walking around. And this is the bicycle circulation. In terms of individual buildings, so we are going to look at the B1 building first, which is at the corner of Stanford and Hollis. And essentially, like I mentioned, it's an R&D lab building. The yellow is the R&D functions, and the blue is the office functions. And the keynote here that I've highlighted is a roof terrace on B1. This is sort of the rendering, and I'll let the architect get more into detail about what the building is going to be. So this is the B1 building, and this is the B2 and B3 building. So the B2, B3 buildings, these are the sort of the basic floor plans. Again, yellow is active lab space, blue is office space. And this is the rendering of B2, B3. And this kind of shows you the Hollis Street elevation. So this is the existing building, what I'm calling the main signature building of the campus. And this is B2, B3, and this is B1. Moving on to the parking garage, that B13, B14, these are the basic floor plans, and this is the elevation. It's a concrete building with the potential cladding of either masonry or maybe terracotta. Now, the main reason we are here, and in terms of the direction that the applicant is seeking, is whether the proposed FTP, whether the commission can make the finding that the proposed FTP is in substantial conformance. Because if the commission feels that it cannot make that finding, then they would have to come back with an alternative game plan, which would be amending the PUD PDP. However, if the commission believes that it is possible for them to make this finding, then they will dig further into the individual new buildings, and I anticipate more study sessions on that. But right now, the basic question is whether the proposed FTP is in substantial conformance with the PUD PDP. So the B1, so the first column is the building numbers. This is the PUD characteristics, and this is the proposed FTP. So in terms of uses, it's pretty similar and is consistent. In terms of height, the PUD PDP has different, it varies on the building, and it ranges from 65 feet to 220 feet. The proposal also varies, but it does not exceed the maximum height of 225 feet. There are setbacks also defined in the PUD, and the portions of the building is different setbacks, as you can see on the screen, and they differ from the different setbacks that the proposal has. This is the B2 and B3 building. Again, the uses are similar, the heights are similar. In terms of setbacks, it's a little different. They're varying, but it's still 32 to 47 feet, whereas there is a greater setback of 75 feet. To that extent, they do differ. So the garage structure. Now this is where this will B13, B14 is one building in the FTP. And what was approved for the PUD and PDP was the parking, but in addition to that, also administrative tower complex. There were two towers of 200 feet and 150 feet were contemplated. In the proposal, we have only the structured parking, which is a little under what it's still below the 75 feet, but there is no office space or lab space proposed on this building. So to that extent, it's not strictly in compliance. So this kind of gives you a better look and understanding of how to look at the two. So on the top is the approved PDP, and this is the proposal. So let's look at the Hollis facade at first. It's clear in terms of setbacks. There's a wall of buildings with different setbacks. The proposal here opens up. There is not a wall of building, and the setbacks vary, but there are connections to the campus. In terms of the massing here, it's kind of not the same, but it doesn't, like I'd mentioned, this height does not exceed the maximum height that was allowed here. On the parking structure, again, this is a shorter building because it's only a parking structure, whereas the PUD has both the parking structure as well, the taller elements being the office and lab space. This again gives you a look at the different heights. Again, the main difference is on the parking garage, like I mentioned before. This kind of tells you about the setbacks. Again, as I mentioned, setbacks are a little different, but it does create more, there's no wall here of buildings, and it creates more, creates more visible, creates more connections within the campus. In terms of design, the PUD and PDP has an extensive conditions of approval, which include a very lengthy conditions, and one particular condition, number 40, which talks about design, includes a number of diagrams focusing largely on the Hollis Street frontage. It should be noted that when the City Council in 2002 approved the FDP for Building 3, they determined that the project substantially conformed to the PDP, but acknowledged that there were a number of variations between the PDP and the FDP, including the provisions of condition number 90. These included setbacks along the Hollis Street, size, configuration of open space, square footage of the building, and tree species, to name a few of the things that are listed in condition number 90. In terms of parking, parking, what they are proposing a parking structure of 2,400 spaces. This parking structure will support parking for the existing signature building and parking for the 2 new buildings that are proposed in the FDP. In addition, the BMR has 2 additional buildings that they will propose in the future, which is building 8A and 8B. So the total square footage of lab and office that this structure will provide is a little less than 1 million square feet. Now, if you were to look at our current code, then this amount of lab and office space would trigger a demand of 1,455 spaces. It is, at this moment, is unclear whether the PUD, PDB conditions of approval require the proposed parking of 2,400 spaces. Staff is currently digging into this issue, and at the next study session, there would be further clarification in terms of the parking and how much does the PUD indicate, and how much is, of course, what they are providing.
So, Maru, before you move on, just for clarification, the 1,455, what is that number? Is that the current city code requirement?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
So, but if this were new buildings, then this would be the code. But
okay. And that's for all 4 buildings?
Correct.
Okay.
So that would be the estimated demand. And then, as we know, our parking requirements take the estimated demand, and it can be 33% less, or it can be 10% more.
And it's actually all 5 buildings, I mean?
That is right.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So this project was reviewed by staff at the DCC meeting, and staff was generally appreciative of opening of the Chiron Way and making the campus more open and accessible. Generally, the design of the 2 buildings along Hollis was appreciated. And it was the parking structure that yielded many critical assessments. Basically, that it created for a bland pedestrian experience off Horton, which is a bicycle boulevard, and the need for 3 points of entry and exit into the parking structure. Staff feels that a substantial redesign of the structure is needed to make this building compatible with the Sherwin-Williams buildings that will be going into construction any day now. And also, of course, our Horton Landing Park, which will occur to its north. It was also commented that once we figure out how much parking is really needed in terms of what the PUD says, and if it is less, then that would help in making, it would create more flexibility of making the building attractive. It was also noted that the location of the long-term parking in the garage was considered to be too far for where the employees will be working, which is off on Hollis. So it was suggested that the long-term parking should be closer to where people will be actually working.
Just to clarify, that's long-term bicycle parking.
That's right.
Yes.
Right. Did I?
I didn't catch that.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. So, like I mentioned, the main question for the commission is the conformance with PUD PDP. There is a difference in the location of the users, such as no office is proposed for the building 13, B13, B14, and certain heights do not exactly match. In addition, the building floor plate for B1 is also at variance with the PUD PDP. And this is in order to accommodate the space needs for labs that are being built today. And it also allows for a more flexible and efficient lab layout for building tenants. You have to keep in mind that when the Chiron PUD PDP was approved, it was meant for one tenant. It was seen that Chiron will be building that out. BMR is building these buildings for multi-tenants. And so it needs to look at what is the market for the type of lab buildings and what kind of layout is needed for today's labs, where you have multiple tenants, like in a lot of the Wareham buildings. Emery Station East has multiple tenants. Emery Station West is also, well, it's kind of has multi, although Aldous Samergen has taken a bunch of space. Anyway, overall, the proposed building heights and massing do not exceed the maximum heights and the areas permitted in PUD PDP. FAR as well is at the very low. It's very low as reported in the staff report. So the question is, can the commission make the finding that the FDP substantially conforms to the PDP plan? At this point, Commission may have any preliminary comments on the design and site planning for the proposed buildings. Like I mentioned, we anticipate those actual the buildings coming back with further details. But any comments at this point are also very much welcome. So that concludes my presentation. I know that the applicant also has an extensive presentation.
Thank you, Maru. At this point, are there any more questions for staff from the commission? Yes, Commissioner Keller?
Maru, do the proposed setbacks of this plan we're seeing tonight meet the current code? I know that they are different than the original PUD, but do they meet our current codes?
Well, I mean, it's a PUD, so PUD determines its own. Right. But if it is in an MUN zone, which this would be if it was in a PUD, then there are really no setbacks in our code for MUN.
Okay. That's
so to
right.
that extent,
there are no setbacks in any zoning district other than residential. And there's no residential zoning near here.
And we mentioned them in this because then if that's the case?
Because the PUD has setbacks.
Okay.
In this particular PUD prescribed setbacks from Hollis Street.
But so those are changing in this plan?
I'll defer to Miru and the
So those are?
Yeah, the setbacks are changing from the PUD
correct.
to the... Okay.
Yes, yes.
But there's no requirement that we have certain setbacks currently throughout the city for non-residential.
Correct.
Okay.
So if this was built today on its own, then the new buildings on Hollis would not need to maintain any setbacks.
Okay. One quick question about the PUD relationship to design guidelines. Is there a there's still a necessity to be consistent with the design guidelines?
No.
Okay.
So it has to be consistent with the PUD.
Okay. So
PDB and the general plan.
Okay.
All right, are there any more questions? Commissioner Sohani? And then we'll get back to you, Commissioner Donaldson. Sorry.
It's okay.
So just to build up on that previous discussion point, so you're saying that we need to evaluate setbacks based on this PUD, PDP, right? And they cannot deviate from it. Like they cannot use current city guidelines as a base. Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is that the question being asked is, does the FDP, in order for the commission to approve the FDP, the finding that needs to be made is that it substantially conforms.
Okay.
It doesn't say completely. The key word here is substantially conforms.
Okay.
So in terms of the setbacks, for example, this building is maintaining setbacks, but they are not the same. There is heights. The heights are a little different. The massing occurs elsewhere. Is it substantially conforming or not? In terms of, so you can see it in terms of the overall PUD, as we have been doing with the parcel marketplace issue. Does
If
that
I could-
answer your question?
Yeah.
If I can just elaborate a little bit. As Miru mentioned, the city council previously approved an FDP for building 3 that never got built. Back in those days, I think that was 2002, the city council had to approve FDPs. Under our current regulations, as you know, that's not the case, but in those days they did. And that was just 7 years after they had approved the the PDP. And the council found that the FDP for building 3 did not exactly match the rules for the PDP that they themselves had adopted 7 years previous. And they enumerated a number of ways in which it deviated. But they said in the resolution approving that FDP that was okay because of a number of reasons that they gave, that it didn't exceed the total square footage and the FAR and all these other things. That language is in your staff report. But I just want to point out that the city council itself, in approving the first or the second FDP for this project, acknowledged that there was some flexibility in interpreting the PDP. And at this point, since FDPs are now approved by the Planning Commission, it's kind of up to you, and especially since none of the current commissioners or city council members that were here in 1995 are still here today. So it's up to you all to determine whether or not you feel that it substantially conforms to the PDP.
Great. Thanks for that, Charlie. One other question, and again, this is just for me to understand the context of this development. Are there any plans to develop the parcels on either side of, like B1, B2, B3? So, on the east of Hollis Street and on the west of what's called as Chiron Way?
Chiron Way? Okay.
Oh, Chiron Way.
So you're saying here?
Yeah.
So this is Chiron Way, yeah?
Yeah. So any future proposals of developing, say, building G, T, B7?
So the BMR is planning to develop. If you see on your plans, I didn't show in the slide. So there is a graphic in the plans, there's a graphic in the plans that shows what the BMR's future proposal is. So that would be on page.
G027 is the isometric.
G001, you mean?
G027.
Oh, okay.
G001.
Yeah, okay. And then any plans on the east of Hollis Street? So, not exactly BMR properties, but, these other properties on the east of Hollis. Are there any...
East of Hollis?
Yeah.
Those are not part of the PUD.
No, I understand that. But my general question is, has there been any discussions of developing those in the near future, or none of that has come into?
All the properties east of Hollis Street there, we have not even had inquiries.
Okay, yeah.
Regarding, any redevelopment or...
Yeah, I'll explain my reasoning in the deliberation, but I just wanted to ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Sohane. At this point, we have Commissioner Donaldson that has questions.
Yeah, I was curious about the former condition of approval 90 that had the design conditions in it. Are most of those captured in the illustrations that you gave us about the heights and the setbacks?
Those are the big ones.
Yeah.
The ones that I showed, the heights, the setbacks, the uses.
Okay.
So if you cannot, the rest are pretty minor. The rest are things like tree species, things like, more further details, which are easier. But the big ones are the ones that I mentioned.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, are there any more questions from the commission at this point? All right, seeing none, we want to invite the applicant up for a presentation.
So we have a
Yeah, I was
little-
gonna say, for the
Sorry, we
technical
have a technical
difficulty.
difficulty. We've discovered when we switch from the computer to the overhead camera, then the computer crashes.
Oh,
So
Oh,
we have to reboot the
Um,
computer. So
I think
just
that
bear with us.
this time might be a good time for recess. Do we want to take 5 minutes for that?
sure.
Yeah. All right. We're going to go ahead and take a recess for 5 minutes, returning at 8:55. All right, we're going to go ahead and end recess here. It is 8:55, and the applicant is here, so we want to welcome you and invite you for your presentation.
Good evening.
Can you move your microphone up a bit? There you go.
Of course, yeah.
Oh.
Maybe.
Is that better? We're good? Okay. All right, good evening. My name is Salil Payapalli. I'm VP of Development for Biomet Realty here in the area. How many minutes do we have? About 10?
You can present for as long as you want to right now.
No, 10.
No, we'll be crisp. 10
is good.
We'll let you know.
When we pass out, you've gone too far.
Okay. By way of introductions, we definitely appreciate the opportunity. Biomet Realty is a full-service real estate firm focused in the life science area of work. We have a global portfolio in all the big life science hubs across the world, really. So we take a long view, and we're stewards of mission-critical facilities for blue-chip companies. That's what we do. So we brought a copy of our collective resume. These are some of the assets we've got across our portfolio. We're about 12 to 13 million square feet in our operating portfolio. One of the biggest is in the Bay Area. We've got Boston, Cambridge, San Diego, UK, and then we've recently expanded into Emeryville. Our customer base, about 200 plus customers. A majority of them, 4/5, are large established investment grade public companies, blue chip global enterprises. A sample of our client base, companies like AbbVie, Thermo Fisher, Gilead, Illumina, more recently Zymergen and Amgen. Our team, we have Perkins Coie advising us on land use. Perkins Coie advising us on land use. We have Cecily Barclay, the firm-wide chair of the practice. We have her undivided attention. We also have John McCow with FLAD, whose history on this site goes back to the beginning of the project, about 20 years ago. The Emeryville Center of Innovation, we're bringing this forward, a project that has really sat for about 2 decades inactive. And so we're really excited to bring it forward with a lot of positive momentum here. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to transform the district. As a point of detail, we're fully committed to fulfilling our obligations under the development agreement, including the minimum project obligation. That's one of the fine print items in our development agreement. A few highlights that John with FLAD will get into. Highlights of the development. There's 5 things I want to flag as we're going through the details of the design presentation. Number 1, it's a cutting edge design that's informed by how our clients are seeing the future of their global centers of excellence. This is the latest and greatest in how our customers see the future of life science innovation clusters. The second point, the old design, the existing building 4 and the PDP envisioned a series of inward-looking private walled courts that we're bringing and transforming to outdoor gardens, making them accessible, usable, and meaningful. 3, we're breaking up what essentially was a large superblock, a big, massive, windowless building that we're breaking up to create view corridors and pedestrian circulation that allows the campus to breathe. 4, we're taking a whole bunch of fences down, fences that currently wall in these pocket parks, making them not that accessible. And then 5, we're opening up Chiron Way for pedestrian and bicycle circulation. As an additional footnote, picking up on the presentation Miru made, in terms of the square feet that we're proposing today and potentially in future FDPs, the FDP allows us north of 1 million square feet. And just like one of the initial buildings, B4, is 285 and not 250 as it was stated in the PDP. Just so, B8 and the 2 buildings in the middle of the campus may also be north of 220,000 square feet that I noticed on one of your slides. I think the PDP allows us the flexibility to make it larger than that. Similarly, the garage, the PDP allows by right 2,400 spaces, I believe. And so those are the constraints we're working within. With that, and I'll come back to a few closing points here, I do want to make the most of the time we have here and allow John to present the design. Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is John Micko. I'm with Flad Architects. And as Salil mentioned, I've actually been involved in this project since its inception back in 1993 and 4. We began working with Chiron on the development of this master plan, ultimately working with Ricardo Legarreta on the development of the design. So I've got a lot of history, and frankly, I'm very glad to be back here today talking to you about this project and this kind of new iteration of what this project can be. Thanks to Maru and to Salil for doing a great job of introducing this. There's a lot of things I can add, but in the interest of trying to get out of here at a reasonable hour, I'm going to try and limit my comments to things that haven't been touched on so far, and then certainly can address any questions that you may have along the way. So you've seen this rendering. This is the new vision for the project, and I'm going to talk about why that's important right now. But first, I want to talk a little bit about the campus history and kind of where we started with this project back in 1993, 4, and 5. At that time, City of Emeryville was a very different place, as I'm sure you're all aware. There was a lot of undeveloped land. Bay Street hadn't been developed yet. The bridge, Bay Street and the East Bay Bridge Shopping Center hadn't been developed yet. The Wareham development and the Amtrak station were just being implemented. A lot of undeveloped industrial land. And the images of the place at this time that I first started working on this project looked like this. You can see in the center of the image the old Chiron Building M, which was a remnant of I think the Shell Oil development that was here prior to this. That building has since been demolished, but this view is taken from the corner of Stanford and Hollis, as you probably recognize. This is a view from Hollis and 53rd looking back. The rail spur ran through the center of the site. The platform was elevated. Everything was fenced with rusting chain link fence, very industrial kind of a nature. And this is the area that ultimately became Stanford Avenue. So very different place back then. Homeless people, industrial character. The building design responded to this environment at the time. And I think as we'll illustrate through this discussion today, it's a very different environment right now, and we need a different response to be able to reflect that. So I'll touch briefly on the PDP that was developed. This is the overall rendering that was generated as a part of that. And as Maru had mentioned earlier, this was a campus for a company that was up and coming, strong, powerful, growing, ambitious, And this vision by Bill Rudder and Ed Penhote, the CEO and president at that time, envisioned this giant campus, an integrated biopharmaceutical company that dealt with everything from administration, research, manufacturing, all on one site in this giant campus. And you saw the plan for the buildings as they were proposed, a series of essentially building block elements, very inward focused, because as we saw in the earlier pictures, the campus itself was set in the midst of this kind of post-industrial setting. And out of that came a design that was very specific. Ricardo Legarreta really embraced the situation, really, with our input on the planning aspects of it and the building requirements. He embraced the architecture and the environment and created this diagram, if you will, illustrative plan for what that campus could be using these building blocks. Now, keep in mind that at this particular time, nobody knew what was going to happen with the company. This was an architectural element, not a programmatic solution. And so the intent here was that there needed to be a lot of flexibility to accommodate the evolution of the company over time. So, what came out of the original PDP process was a series of diagrams, the Condition 90 that Maru mentioned, that was very literal. It took, quite literally, the model that we had developed for the PDP, working with Ricardo Legarreta, and that rendering you just saw with the beautiful colored buildings, and almost literally measured it and articulated that in a series of conditions that were very, very specific. Perhaps it was inappropriate, perhaps it was, in any event, situation's different now. So here you see the massing along Hollis Street. You see the blue, which represents the lower buildings, the tan, which represents the tower at 225 feet, and then the potential for a community center, conference center building in red. And then that red line represents the original setback line that was taken off of that measured drawing. And here again, the model of the corner, which reflected building 1 articulation, this highly sculptural form, that was initially developed by Ricardo Legarreta as this, kind of beacon on the corner of Stanford and Hollis. But again, measured, and put down in the conditions of approval. So this represents the overall plan, and here we've actually, instead of coloring the buildings, we've colored the open space diagram itself. And the important thing to note about this, as I mentioned earlier, is that this was conceived as a campus that was actually isolated from the street. Ironically, you see a series of bridges that actually interconnect with the parking structure. The intent was that the majority of circulation within the campus happened at level 3, top of the podium level. And pedestrians basically moved from the parking structure to the buildings across a series of bridges and didn't have to interact at grade level with perhaps undesirable elements that might exist. And these series of kind of orange elements in the center of the building were the elevated open space that could be enjoyed by the occupants of the buildings, but they were separate from ground level. So we had this mega campus of these elevated buildings, and the ground level was intended to be for support, manufacturing, and mechanical systems. The Planning Commission at the time and the City Council, actually, as you went through the PDP, you'd see that there's a series of requirements for liner space along the face, especially Hollis Street and the corner of Stanford. I don't have a diagram of that right here, but the reality of that was a response to this idea that the building base was not going to be active in street fronting. It was these larger mechanical and support spaces. And so Council and Commission wisely indicated that there should be some activity along that street facade. So you've seen this diagram. It represents the massing that was part of the original Legarreta design. And I want to talk a little bit about why things are different right now. So we know the development that's taken place, extensive development that's taken place in Emeryville. It's a much more pedestrian friendly, much more diverse kind of environment with obviously the development of Bay Street. Pixar came in shortly after the original PDP was approved for this project. The East Bay Bridge Shopping Center was built right during the time frame when the PDP was being approved. And we obviously have new multifamily residential housing, all in this same area across the street at Stanford and Hollis. Very, very different environment. We have the general plan for the city, which envisions this system of greenways and connected open space that really make this community livable and pleasant for people, at ground level. A very important component to consider today. Another key factor is the difference in the market. As we mentioned, this was designed as a single tenant integrated biopharmaceutical company. Now we're looking at this as a life science marketplace, a life science, a space for multi-tenant life science occupants. And so the floor plates that were designed as these insular, inward-looking buildings really now need to look very, very different. And the scale and the size of the floor plates need to be different to accommodate those tenant needs. And we've included here some diagrams. You can see in the center, the very center of the plan, that is the diagram for Building 4. This almost kind of cruciform shape with interior courtyards being the primary focus of the building and organizing the floor plate. The other plans around the edges are new buildings. Top left corner is a building that we've designed for BMR in South San Francisco. And these buildings, to represent the needs of clients today, they tend to be long and linear, great exposure to daylight for both labs and offices, not compact square elements where we have a tremendous amount of interior space, but again, long linear elements where we have good exposure to light and views and minimum amount of interior landlocked space. I'll also mention the plan off on the right-hand side. There you see the little L-shaped yellow with the gray square. That actually represents the scale floor plate of the tower floor plates, B1, upper levels, as indicated in the conditions of approval for the preliminary development plan. That's a 7,500 square foot floor plate, 7,500 square feet. It's probably the size of your office, over here, but it's the top of it's the 12th or more floors of the upper building. And again, not really a usable space for a contemporary life science research and development building. So what does BMR have in mind? They want to reinvigorate this campus. They want to modernize the campus. They want to respond to these new criteria, and they want to respond to these tenant-driven, desires and demands for space. And that really comes down to the plan that you've seen presented to you already. It breaks down this mega block into smaller components that are marketable, that are buildable, that are economic and functional and efficient. It opens up the campus to create this porosity. It allows people to move through the campus, and it creates this central open space within the campus along Chiron Way that's protected, but yet accessible to people. So there's a focus now, a center of the campus that we can build around. It creates, as I said, this series of buildings. It still emphasizes the corner of Stanford and Hollis, which was one of the original objectives of the master plan as it was developed and approved with this tower element. We've broken the massing down by articulating the volumes of the building, manipulating the building heights so that we comply with the spirit of the original PDP, but yet we have floor plates that actually work for the tenants that we're trying to achieve today. And we still have that strong tower element which accentuates that corner of Stanford and Hollis. So here's just a diagram that simply reflects the things I just mentioned, the green space in the center, the blue building elements, and then the movement paths between these buildings and around these buildings. Maru mentioned that the most exciting thing for her was opening up Chiron Way. I mean, I think that's an exciting component as well, but the most exciting thing for me is to actually see this campus go from, you know, what was a very insular kind of campus in 1995 to this exciting, modern, you know, porous campus, which has a very strong ground level connection. That's what I think is exciting about the project. So here's the open space diagram that I mentioned before. We had the green represents the public open space. The darker green represents the limited access, I'll say. I can't read the terms that we used previously. And then the red represents the private street. And then the orange represents those private spaces within the buildings. And so we've gone from that to this, where these are buildings that are set in a park. They're not buildings that are isolated and separated from the campus. And we think this is a tremendous benefit to the city of Emeryville, and the ability to move down Chiron Way, to move between the buildings, to access now the new bridge that's going into Bay Street, all of those things moving through the campus will certainly energize and improve the environment. So I have a series of slides here that go through the building projects, but Maru did a very good job of kind of talking about them previously. I'll just touch on a couple things. I mentioned the idea of the view from Hollis and Stanford being important, having that tower element that really accentuates that corner. It's a beacon within the city. It's, you know, one of the few areas in this portion of the city that's allowed to have something that's higher than this 90-foot height level. So it's a very important element. And the articulation that we're showing for the building tries to do two things. It tries to break up the mass, as I said, give the building some sense of scale without becoming totally massive and overwhelming. But these height lines that we see cutting across the building also relate to the adjacent building 4 element. And one of the other exciting things, you know, having worked with Ricardo on the design of building 4, you know, we're not going to replicate his design. As an architect, you know, that would be the last thing we'd want to do, is to try to mimic the design that he had developed for building 4. But what we do want to do is we want to create a complement. Building 4 is an icon. We need to, you know, leave it alone. We need to let it stand on the corner, and we need to surround it with buildings that are complementary and not competitive with it. And that's the intent of the design. It's relatively simple, modern, clean, but it picks up on the lines, the elements of the base, where we have, you know, strong masonry components in the original building. We'll carry those forward across the base of these buildings. You know, elements in the top, the colored screens, the shapes and forms, we'll respect those, but we won't mimic the building that's currently there. So that's really, I think, about all I have to say, and welcome your comments and consideration of this project. I do want to, sorry, there's one more thing I want to mention here, and actually it's something that hadn't been touched on previously. Deals with the massing of building 1. This is a diagram that represents the original Chiron PDP. And the important thing here to recognize is you see the bend in Chiron Way, where it, you know, actually bends as it moves north and bends to the west. The original vision was that the buildings stepping back along Hollis Street also stepped back along Chiron Way. And so the setbacks and the stepbacks that were generated as a part of the original PDP were predicated on this kind of, you know, building step back. The current plan right now is that BMR doesn't own those properties to the west, as you can see here. And Chiron Way, at this point, is going to have to remain straight. So what we've done here is we've actually overlaid in the red line the original PDP boundary. The black dashed lines represent Chiron Way's current alignment. The white represents the proposed buildings, and the green is where, you know, we're taking away building and adding open space. And so you see the setback lines along Hollis Street. We've respected those to the extent that we can. And there's some deviations from the original plan, but from our perspective, we believe that we comply with the original intent, which was to activate that street facade, break down the mass, so we didn't have one mega block, you know, from for Hollis from 53rd all the way to Stanford. We have an articulated facade, and we think we've accomplished that with breaking up the buildings, both in terms of physical mass, space between them, and then treatment of the facade itself. So with that, I appreciate your time and attention. Look forward to your comments.
Thank you, John. Come on up. Do you have something to add there?
One more thing about the garage.
Okay.
We did make a note in the staff report about a couple of things that were made in the staff report about the garage. And so yes, the design's preliminary, and part of our design brief to Flat Architects definitely includes, don't make it look like the Berlin Wall. And so we're going to, work on the massing and breaking it up into pieces, the bland pedestrian experience, seeing lights and car lights, etc. These are all part of our design brief to Flat. So for example, a filigree screen, upturned beams, there's a portfolio of solutions that we've traditionally employed in our sort of blue chip buildings to address garages and in very dense urban contexts. How can we be responsive to context? How can we build garages, because people need garages and people drive. We do need garages, but how do you build those in contexts like this? And so we've got a track record of getting them to be designed well, and so we are responding to these comments. The design's in development right now. The seeing cars and lights, and then the multiple entries and exits. It could go both ways. On the one hand, having multiple entries and exits reduces queuing time in and out of the garage, which is a plus, because you don't have cars queuing in what otherwise might be a pedestrian and bicycle pathway. On the flip side, yes, it's 3 exits and entrances. And so that's a traffic management and internal circulation management aspect that we, as we advance the design, will pay close attention to. What I'm doing here is acknowledging the comments that were made in the staff report about the garage. The total number of spaces was another comment, so we're picking up what the PDP allows, that total number. We're going to stay within those constraints. There was a comment about long-term bicycle parking in there. Yes, absolutely. And so we'll have supplementary, so we'll move those closer to in and around the buildings with, LEED mandated showers and locker rooms and such. So those, I thought, were the highlights about the garage in the staff report. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to go ahead and open up for questions to the applicant from the commission. And I'll begin with you here on my right, Commissioner Sohane.
Yeah, just a few questions. Is there any parking that is being provided at B1, B2, B3 on that particular block, or is all of the parking supposed to be in this multi-story garage?
The original PDP envisioned all parking on the west side of Horton Street, and just a few spaces here and there under buildings in this tall first floor level. We have adhered to that from the PDP, so all of the parking right now is along Horton.
Okay. And again, some of this question might be a bit too detailed, but I just want to throw it out there for consideration in the future. But have you considered what kind of or how much traffic would be on Chiron Way? Or because, you are emphasizing that as a ped bike connection, I just want to get a sense if, vehicles would have equal access, or how is that being thought about?
That's a very good question. Our vision for that space, and I'll go back to an overall site plan. Here we go. Our vision for that space is that that's it's a warm, inviting, open space. It has to be accessible for fire department access. It has to be accessible to service vehicles, because we can't service these buildings off of Hollis Street. So, and right now the loading dock for Building 4 is along Chiron Way as well. So the intent is to treat that very much as a plaza type space. Minimum amount of traffic would be minimum amount of vehicular traffic would be our objective. high degree of pedestrian, high degree of bicycle, minimum amount of cars, so that it's really just relegated to, you know, service and to, you know, fire truck access. So the goal is to treat it with, you know, vehicle friendly, but, you know, paving materials, not curb and gutter, not, you know, blacktop paving, but something that's very compatible with a hardscape pedestrian oriented space.
Thank you. And then one last question was, you know, when I was looking at some of your circulation diagrams, it wasn't very clear to me how traffic which is heading northbound on Hollis would access these buildings. Would they try to get onto Chiron Way? Would they take like a U-turn at Stanford? Has that been thought about? I know you have added some drop-off points both on Chiron Way as well as Hollis Street, but it wasn't clear to me. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Very good question. There's going to be a number of different types of traffic, right? We'll have employee traffic, obviously, which would, you know, migrate towards Horton Street, down Stanford 53rd, or even, you know, using that from north or south. So the primary employee traffic, you know, would not necessarily occur on Hollis Street. You know, nowadays, obviously, every project that, you know, we develop is designed to accommodate the, you know, Ubers and the Lyfts and those kind of things, because so many of our, you know, younger employees travel by that means. And so the intent is to have drop-offs. We'd like to get a curb cut along Hollis Street so that we can have drop-offs in front of the buildings. You can see it here on this plan, right in between B1 and B23. We would have a similar drop-off along Chiron Way so that those vehicles can, in fact, turn down either 53rd or down Stanford and then approach, you know, from either way. So that's the plan to handle that type of traffic.
Thank you.
Commissioner Young, do you have any questions?
Yeah, sure. And I want to take a moment to look at that model in a little while as well. Let's see. So let's just start with the garage. I'd like to get a little bit more ideas of the views from what the apartments from across the freeway, what across the railroad tracks would be looking at. Something that we could bring up with the Art Commission, kind of the same thing that we're doing in Parcel B.
Commissioner Young? Is that a question?
Is that a question? That's a question. We'll bring it up later. And then as well, in terms of the use of these open spaces, I think they're really wonderful. You know, running people through them and all this. Question I have is, so the activities that you're planning to do there is like a rush of people. What do you expect? Like, what do you expect the residents to get to do there? Or is this kind of like a Google campus where you kind of just mosey along and you see a dinosaur, you see the Android things, or is there models? I mean, is there sculptures out there? And then the other question I have too is like, I'm really glad that you did take a look at, you were working with Ricardo, the original architect, and looking at how that was all tied into place on this thing. But in your perspective, you show this large glass curtain wall, and then it's a box on top of another glass curtain wall, which is on top of another box. And you show the one angle from, I guess would be on Hollis Street. It'd be interesting to see the angle from...
Commissioner Young, I'm going to interrupt again. I'm sorry. These sounds like comments that we can make during deliberation. Do you have a specific question that you'd like to ask the applicant at this point?
Yes. And would you... okay, so the first question I had was, what the activities might be inside these things.
Perhaps I can answer that question while you're thinking.
Sure. Thank you, John.
Yeah, the intent is that this would be a very active open space. And the designs that we're doing for buildings, these days, we want to see an active ground floor plane. So if there's a cafe, a coffee shop, elements that are serving, in this particular instance, there'll be, eventually, potentially a couple million square feet of space developed between the BMR and the Griffles portions of these properties. So there's a real market for, employees serving spaces that, where they can grab a sandwich, grab a cup of coffee, those kind of things.
So
we'd
that was a
envision-
question I was trying to get to, and I didn't want to kind of ask that because I didn't want to suppose that a retail situation would be placed there.
That's something I think to be determined. The buildings are going to be multi-tenant. They're going to be available for that. But we envision an active first floor space. It'll have the lobby, the entries, and it could have these employee serving spaces. And then the outdoor space is envisioned as maybe not something quite as fanciful as Google, but outdoor workplace, especially in the Bay Area environment. In this case, a wind protected location. It's going to be a great opportunity to have spaces for people to sit outside and just relax and enjoy themselves. So it'll be a combination of hardscape, softscape, seating, plants, all those elements.
Feel free to make it better in Google if you want.
Do you have something to add to that question there?
Yes.
Great.
Our view, portfolio-wide, is that the days of walled, enclosed campuses, are over. And I don't say this lightly. We've been transforming districts, whether it's Cambridge, Boston, or many areas in the Bay Area as well, in creating urban campuses that breathe, that people can walk in and out, a coffee shop here, another cafe over there. If you look at the base level of many of our campuses, as an example, when I point, I move away from the mic, but trust me, there's Cambridge, Boston, and there's the Bay Area, and there's opportunities to activate it with coffee shops where anybody could walk in. I mean, that's the vision of this. We're taking away the walls. It's a breathable campus. It's urban, and it's integrated into the neighborhood. So to answer your question, yes, we do expect to have this amenity rich, to have resources there for the neighborhood, for residents, for the life science community of researchers, not just the ones working inside our buildings with our clients, but others, to mingle and to collaborate. That's the point of these innovation clusters. So yes.
That's the question I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have additional questions to Commissioner Young?
No additional questions for now.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Donaldson?
I was just wondering, on your open space diagram, you had the lighter green as the public space, including Chiron Way and some other areas, and then you had the darker space that was designated as semi-public space. What differentiates those? What kind of restrictions? What kind of?
It's a very good question, Commissioner. What we were trying to do is to replicate the terminology that was used in the original PDP of the semi-private and the semi-public and the public. In reality, there won't be any difference. In the PDP, those terms were used very specifically to allow the fences, that currently exist, and a park that's open from 8 to 5, and then the gate closes and you can't get in there. That was the original basis of that terminology. But here, the distinction actually is meaningless, because the intent here is that it's all open space. It's all accessible. None of it's fenced off and locked.
Thank you.
Okay. Vice Chair Thompson?
Yeah, I had a question about GO15, the pedestrian circulation. You have a diagonal in this, and I just wanted to clarify that the future plan puts a building in that location. So this is a temporary route? Is that what you're intending?
Oh, the diagonal.
Literally, yes, that is temporary. The intent, let's see if I can go back. Well, here you see it right here, right? The B8A and B, the intent is to have open space between those buildings. So the route would no longer be a pure diagonal, but would be a zigzag between them. But the intent is definitely to maintain the ability to circulate through and between those buildings.
Okay, and I think you should clarify that, because it is a strong element in terms of the circulation. I mean, it would suggest that, that's integral to the final design, and it's not. So it should be qualified as slightly different route.
Understood. Appreciate that.
Commissioner Keller?
I just had a question for you on the parking. The current parking structure that now is part of Griffles is a fairly big structure. Have you guys looked at partnering with them and using that for some of your parking and then being able to create a smaller structure down Horton Street a ways?
That's a variable, that's really outside of our control. It's a different entity. We don't own it. We don't control it. We can have those conversations. The most recent lease, this Zymergen lease that we did in Building 4, the big square existing building, they what we call market is at 2 per thousand, and as we run that equation through the rest of this development, Building 1. 300,000, Building 2, 200. Once you add it all up, there needs to be cars somewhere, and that's B13. Yeah. Your question about a garage owned by somebody else outside of our land area, not in our control, is a variable. It's a wild card variable that we wouldn't count on as we develop and lease and make binding commitments to our tenants. So wouldn't it be nice, but is that something we would count on as we're building and committing to leases? We're going to have to solve within our land area.
Okay. I have a couple questions about the Horton Street side as well. And I'm wondering if you can provide me some more information about like justifications for the amount of parking that you're asking for on a bicycle boulevard.
The garage B13. The garage B13. We're following the textbook really. The PDP, the PUD. That's the arrangement on the site plan that we inherited with this, with the land and the rights therein. It had a certain arrangement of uses, a big, a tower in the corner, certain other, and so we're following that rule book. It says here's where the garage needs to go, here's the volume, here's the massing, and this is the total count. And so we're staying within those guidelines by placing the garage over there and then creating a cluster that's truly a life science, mixed use, as in office and lab and maybe some amenities towards the right side of that campus.
Are there any plans in terms of how to incentivize alternative modes of transit for the tenants that are working in this building?
Absolutely. We do TDM across all our developments. Like cutting edge, whatever's in play today, that's what we do for TDM. Yeah.
Great. And in doing that, do you find that the amount of parking that you're requesting for this application would be justified given all the different modes that you are trying to promote in doing that?
It's a wild card. The employee base, as an example, there are people at Zymergen who are driving reverse commute across from San Mateo County, and so it's a little bit of a wild card as we know that the center of, I'm going to make a broader response to a narrow question and then I'll come back to it, but step back 10,000 feet. The broader picture here is, hey, is the center of gravity shifting east? Where's the real estate going? Where do companies want to be? Where's the employee base? What's their sort of average radius? We've got a big footprint on the peninsula in South San Francisco. We've got a big footprint in Newark, Southeast Bay, and we also very strongly believe in this market as where the center of gravity will eventually move to. But today, if we were to sign another lease for Building 1, their employee base is a wild card. They could be coming from 5 different counties, right? And so we'll put in place TDM programs, last mile. So we'll do a lot of those things, but at the end of the day, how effective might those be? Where might those employees be coming from 2 years, 5 years from now is a wild card. It's a variable outside of our control. What is in our control is to follow and, in good faith, make a real shot at getting the TDM to work. What the outcomes are, we'll try. We've been doing that, a track record across our portfolio. The outcomes are TBD. It's a wild card.
Thank you. Those are all my questions for now. I want to go ahead and open it up for public comment for any members of the public that'd like to comment on this agenda item. All right. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and continue on with deliberation from the Planning Commission. And I'll begin on my left here with Commissioner Keller.
Thank you, Chair. It's a great project. I'm so excited to see this vacant parking lot become something of a vision. There's a lot to be said here. The Legaretta is a building I've always been very, very fond of. I think it is an icon in our community. I think a whole city block of that would have been way too much. And the way it would have been walled off and et cetera. So I really respect and appreciate how open you've made this campus. It's really a much better project, I think, at this time. That said, I'm not an architect. I don't pretend to be. I don't like to make recommendations to architects for their buildings. But one thing I would like to see, in using the quote mimic, I don't want to see the Legaretta building mimicked. But you guys, Flat has worked in a couple of areas next to Legaretta buildings. You did the Exchange building, which is real near the UCSF campus, and the Legaretta that's there. I also believe I saw something on your website in Monterrey, Mexico. And I think that there's a way that perhaps we could bring the newer buildings in, stitch them into the fabric of that. So speaking of the Exchange in San Francisco, you have a lot of really different sized blocked windows. And I'm thinking in that first section, there'd be the very far south section of building, 2B, that maybe you could do some of that type of item, bringing in that look of the penetrated windows in the Legaretta buildings, kind of in that. Just to give you an idea, because I don't like to say I don't like something and not give suggestions, so I'm not an architect, but I personally would like to see some kind of relation of B2 and B4 kind of transitioning from that to the building at B1. I think that would kind of be a helpful and I see in this picture there's kind of a wrapped corner on the B2 on that side, so maybe that corner could be an element. Just a suggestion, so I'm going to leave it at that. In terms of the parking, and we kind of have gone in, Emeryville has done a really good job of working at trying to promote public transit and other alternative transit sources. And when you say you're building for the future is people living in the East Bay, working in the East Bay. So the fact that people come from San Mateo is current now, and that's probably true. But I think coming into the future, there are going to be more people on this side of the bay coming in. So in the PUD and the current FDP, you're asking for us to make modifications. You're asking us to move tower masts from here to there and et cetera. So I think on the same note, we can ask you to look at parking differently than from the original PUD. You're using that as your reference point, and that's what you want to build, but you're asking us to make alterations and changes in the rest of the PUD to fit your needs now. So I think what a number of us are going to ask is that you look at parking. 2,400 spaces is just going to encourage more people to drive. And we want to encourage people to take alternate transits. We have 10 forms of transit options in this city. So I think there are plenty of options that people can look at, including, Amtrak, which comes from Sacramento or San Jose. So there is a very good alternative to use for that. So please look at that. The parking structure does need to be addressed on four sides. Sherman-Williams is going to be on your western side, and those houses are going to look at that building. So all four sides of that building need to be treated as an equal, and I'm sure you guys will come up with something fantastic. I really appreciate that you're putting the taller building on Stanford and Hollis. It kind of brings that height away from the residential area and kind of into the more commercial area of town, and it does create a more little iconic view from that. So I really appreciate that, and I support the direction in which that's going. I do appreciate, as I said, the opening. I'm glad you addressed some of the concerns of the DCC. I think the parking garage is a bland experience, but I think you're admitted that you're going to address that. I think I really like the design of the building, especially B1. Kind of is a little bit like Bjarke Ingels is doing in New York with the last World Trade Center. They're like the staggered boxes, kind of gives it a fresh look. I think we'd be honored to have something like this in Emeryville.
Commissioner Thompson, or Vice Chair Thompson, I'm sorry.
Sure. I think in general, it's great to see this project and this site coming forward. It's great to see sort of the next generation of it. It's wonderful that it's that you're thinking about a campus idea with a much more public network of spaces. I really like that. The modernization of lab spaces, I think that's important. That's a nice also way to bring the community into the future. But I would say the question about the modernization of transportation is what is the future of transportation? There was a nice narrative in the presentation about how really this has transformed, the buildings have transformed from an interior facing campus to a networked campus. What's the transformation that's happened with parking? We don't have that answer yet. So I would encourage you to develop that narrative, to understand if that means there are less spaces, if that means they're broken up spaces, if that means there's a different situation, because it really is a huge contrast to what you're trying to accomplish with the building spaces in the public realm. You talk about breaking up a super block and then that parking thing, so develop it, work it, make it contribute as much as the other pieces do, would be my suggestion. Also, I'd love to see sustainability integrated in a significant way. This is a common comment that I come up with. And I find that people continually fall short. So I would say pay good attention to that, and really think about the quality of the outdoor spaces and the sunlight and the public realm. Think about the indoor and the performance of the buildings as well. Huge opportunity here, a big big piece of the community. The one other thing I did want to bring up was the mix of uses around the parking garage. That is a substantial difference from the PUD, PDP approval, because, and I feel it's significantly more substantial than the height change. The loss of use there and how that changes the dynamic of that parking resource should be looked at very carefully. And so, I know there's always sort of a competition of where do you put the cars, but that is a significant divergence in terms of how people will use that as a multi-use space. It effectively will not be a multi-use space anymore, and it's a large piece of the project. So those are my comments.
Thank you. Commissioner Donaldson?
Well, I agree with most of Commissioner Thompson's comments, especially regarding the parking and the future of parking and the future of transportation, and the fact that the loss of mixed use on B13 is going to really seriously impact how it looks from the Sherwin-Williams project, where people are living, and how it looks from all the different angles. So that building really, really does need to be rethought, I think. I like the stacked boxes of B1. I think it's a really interesting and dynamic form. The one thing that is lost on the setbacks from the original PUD is more of a sense of the plaza and entry from the corner of Stanford and Hollis Streets. There was a very clear designated setback at that corner, which you have some of, but I'm not quite clear on how you're going to be reading that as you come to that intersection and feel an entry to the building and an entry to the campuses. I love the Legoretta building. I think when you come over Powell Street and you look at it and you see it, it is iconic, and it is something that's really significant in Emeryville, and I hope that it doesn't get buried somehow in there, because I think it's really wonderful. And doing maybe a little more on that. It's just not so clear from the renderings here how the materials relate to that building and how it does tie to it. And as Commissioner Keller said, I'm not looking for somebody to try to add, circular towers that mimic what he was doing or match the windows or anything, but something maybe stronger in the connection of the materials across there, that on at least the first levels, to tie those buildings together would be good. I think that the campus, it's really exciting that it will be opened up, that it'll be permeable, and that people will be able to move through it. And as I've said before, we're really short on open space in Emeryville, so having more publicly accessible open space that's a desirable place for residents as well as for employees to go will be good. So having as many having this most interesting liner uses on those areas around the really nice public space, semi-public public spaces, the large spaces will be a real addition to the project. I think that in general, I can support a substantial similarity to the initial PUD, with the hesitation about B13, because I think that really is going to be something that is likely to be outdated, not too far from the future, and is probably really significantly overparked in the meantime. So looking at breaking that up or making it smaller or doing something that makes that building more engaging to the surrounding community that's emerging around it is really important.
Thank you. Commissioner Young?
Hi, okay. I wanted to kind of make a little comment in terms of the architectural motif and carrying it from the older building to the newer building. B4 has a wonderful arcade that is along the Hollis Street. It's really gorgeous, and it'd be nice that if some of those characteristics, not exactly the same, could be something that could be carried between all the buildings, or something that would, especially to areas where it could be where you start approaching the bridge to get across to Bay Street. I think it's an area that was worth thinking about. Also like the idea of, there's that dead park that's between Hollis and 53rd Street, just sitting there. I mean, that park I live a block away from that, and I never go there. It's not a beautiful park. It's got this round circle. It's just not usable, and people go to this thing and they go and they leave, and I'm not sure why that has to be that way, but maybe if there's something you could think about there, as well too. There's a lot of mention between B8, A8, and B7, and you're having people walk in these areas, or you're having people walk through some of this and not part of some of that. So I can imagine if it's all open, or part of it's open, or it's not open, or how it's gonna kind of. I see the one had a diagonal running through there. So just keep in mind that it can be a very wonderful place for people to kind of go and hang out and not feel threatened or hesitant to go into a place like that and kind of look around. So there's a lot of real excitement. The massing that happens on the Stanford side, the longer mass, I mean, we show the perspective from the side on Hollis Street. It's a shorter side. So it's kind of an important elevation if you think about it. You're kind of looking at the buildings from that side of on the other side is Stanford Avenue, on the opposite side, and you're looking across. And so this is a center point building. It's a kind of an important location. Again, I'll want to take a look at the model, but that's my comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Young. Commissioner Sohane?
So overall, I think most of my comments will resonate with what my fellow commissioners have mentioned. I really like the fine grid approach that you try to create using Chiron Way. Removing that gated nature of the campus and allowing public to, seep in through those parts and access other streets is definitely a positive. I also like the emphasis on the ped bike circulation that you have mentioned. And this is again something that I'll repeat again later on, but Chiron Street really has that potential if you're trying to limit the amount of vehicles that are on it to, have more of a shared street or, pedestrian emphasized street concept, both in its character and materiality. Having said that, and this is, on the topic of circulation, one thing that I'm still unclear is about the vehicular circulation for, vehicles heading northbound on Hollis, because at some point they'll have to, make that turn and get onto either Chiron Way, but then all your building entrances, as you show on the diagrams, are either from Stanford Avenue or Hollis Street. So that kind of, lengthens their travel time. And then, the reason why I was asking if there is any development plans for east or west side is because, if you really zoom out and see, this is actually a super block, and I was wondering if there is any way of continuing 55th Street past, which kind of 90 degrees just east of, the development out here, and if the building needs to be responsive of that. But if there isn't any plan, then that's not a comment that I want to make. The other thing that I do not like about the circulation, and that will also segue into parking, is the 2400 odd vehicle that's placed on Horton Street, which is a bicycle boulevard with multiple entrances. And if we are talking about the future, then we need to design according to the future. The other thing that I don't like with the garage being located so far away is just the fact that people have to walk all the way from there to their buildings. And I'm primarily talking about people with disabilities. It might be difficult for them, and having some sort of parking at B1, B2, B3, either underground or whatever, is kind of something that I would like to suggest. And that might also help you, if underground parking is a feasibility, then that might help you offset the load of B13, B14 and distribute parking, evenly across, or, in some proportion across these two developments. If in its current state, I find the parking structure to be very bulky, especially because of the adjacent development that will be coming out there. And of course, there are various ways of treating parking structures so that they are visually more appealing, that could be looked at. But adding program to it, in terms of distributing some of the office space onto that portion, or a combination of something else, might be other ways of activating and reducing the load of vehicular traffic, especially on Horton Street. Couple of points about just the streetscape and the urban design. So I really like the fact that you have developed these VU corridors, into the development, allowing pedestrians to walk by breaking down that chunkier mass that was initially suggested. And theoretically, the rendering seems like the landscape is going to be very engaging, but the things that are happening along the streetscape side, that is something that can be further developed. The renderings don't show any improvement on the sidewalk amenities on Hollis Street. For instance, at the moment, I see this very nicely developed mature trees with 2 rows on each side, and the current development kind of doesn't acknowledge the existing condition and takes that away. Even if you're taking that away, there should be sidewalk trees planted along the side of the or along the curb side, just so that provides additional buffering, because Hollis Street is a truck route, it's a transit route, and there'll be a significant higher amount of traffic on that portion. One other thing that I would like you to look at is 53rd Street is denoted as a green street in Emeryville general plan, and there might be opportunities out here to tie your Chiron Way, both in terms of sustainable practices, green infrastructure, and other elements as you develop this design further. Let's see. And the pedestrian corridors between B2, B3, B4, and B1, B2, B3 right now, they look like just probably 8 feet wide sidewalk elements going into this space. They could potentially be developed better. If you are anticipating a lot of office use out here and people seeping away during their lunch breaks, I think it needs to be generous enough to accommodate that kind of use. One suggestion was to look into developing some sort of a pocket park on the north side of the development. So north of B1, there is a substantial amount of space, green space that you show out here. And, just programming that a bit more better might be helpful. And then my final set of comments are about the exterior design. So overall, I like the massing and the juxtaposition of design. The use of terracotta screens, glass, all of that looks interesting. But if I have to zoom out and look at this overall development, then there is nothing connecting the three buildings. Well, the two buildings have this glass kind of treatment that connects them, but some of the elements from that iconic Legoretta building, which also has like a bit of Corbusier influence, as to say, can be continued either on the ground floor planes or somewhere on the facade of the building. And I guess 2 months back we discussed the whole notion of how do we make the buildings in Emeryville much more, we were talking about this whole bird safety standard, in which we proposed innovative, or the staff was looking at different ways how glass could be treated using of screens and other stuff, and those could be like some ways of adopting some of the elements of this iconic building and bringing it into these two structures. One, and again, every architect has his or her own way of representing these buildings, but one other way I felt that this level of continuity can be established in the building is just how the planes of the buildings interact. So if you look at B2, the planes seem to be parallel to the alignment of the road. But then as soon as you look at B1, that's at a different odd angle. It's no longer parallel. So having that sense of continuity flow might be another way of just tying the whole development together. But again, that is up to the architect about how they want to express these buildings. Let's see. Yeah, and then just going back to my earlier point about if there's a way of redistributing the program, then although 11th story doesn't seem too high, there might be ways of bringing it down, because right now there is not a building in its vicinity that is as tall as that. I know the general plan allows for an exemption for this particular corner, and by all means, it is an iconic building by itself, but if it helps you bring it a much more comfortable level visually, that would also be something that you can explore. I think those are all my comments.
Thank you. All right. So I want to start by.
Can I just add some?
Of course.
So I just
Go
had
ahead.
a couple concrete things, because I want to let you finish. I did want to say in the package, just to give you guys some marching orders, I would love to see a regional transportation diagram. I would also love to see a caption on your solar diagram. Why is this included? What is important about it? And I'd also like you to consider the large glass wall factor, both from a bird safety standpoint, because those are coming in front of commission very soon, but also in terms of a large western-facing glass wall, which sustainably may be problematic. So those are just like very concrete things that you could look into.
May I clarify one thing?
Sure.
On the regional transportation, are you referring to automobiles or transit or both?
Transit and auto. So I want to get a catchment idea of
Right.
if this big if this big parking resource is needed, what are the other modes? How far away are they? How do they operate differently?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are there any comments from the commissioners? Oh, okay.
Sorry.
I want to wrap it up.
Go for it.
All right. So I'll start by saying that when I first opened my packet, I was drawn to the front of your page immediately. The design is really clean, aesthetically pleasing to the eye. I appreciate that. And I don't want our concern about parking to really be for you to be left with just that, right? The design is great. I think that the glass, how it's stacked on the corner of Stanford. It's great. It's going to complement that corner there, and I appreciate the move away from the block that was designed in the past and how it's open and how you said it breathes, because that's what I think of when I'm walking through this as a pedestrian. Now, that said, giving you some feedback about things that I'd like to see changes in the next iteration, the long-term parking for bicycles is something that was mentioned earlier. In a bigger conversation, bike lockers are something that I feel safe leaving my bike in when I go to work. So if we are to truly try to get people working in these buildings to feel safe during the day, bike lockers are the only thing that I feel safe leaving my bike in, unless it's a large bike locker room, right? Or that's monitored with cameras or some kind of fob access. The Emery go-round at some point will service the Sherwin-Williams property just right next to B13. And so I just want to call that out in terms of that being an option for the people working in this complex, where it's very close. And Emery go-round also passes on Hollis Street. There's some options there for public transit here in our city that we like to use. And we want to incentivize that. So those are some other ways that I might get to this area if I were commuting from the BART. Right? Now, the B13, I think that from most of the commissioners, I'm hearing that there's too much parking, and for the facade of this building, knowing that some of the western-facing facade is going to be facing residents, and also a greenway that's passing right behind there. Right? And so, like, how, as a person enjoying that greenway, am I going to not be just looking at a parking structure that has over 2,000 cars? That's it doesn't really add to my experience using the greenway. And so, thinking about the way that the public market's wrapping the building with art, I'd love to see some type of art. And the B13 building. There are plans for sculpture gardens to be included along the greenway for part of the Sherwin-Williams project. And so I'd like to see that art continue, and I think that's a canvas that could be used for that. The sustainability elements are something I want to reiterate. Those are important to us. You mentioned LEED certification earlier, so I'm sure those are elements that you're going to be considering. I don't know much about different. There's some types of glass that are being used too, where that can capture energy, and I've seen that used in Chicago and some points. And I think that because there's so much glass in this building, I'd like to explore the potential for that being a way to capture energy from the sun through the glass that's being used. That could be included in part of the LEED certification elements. I think that the commissioners overall captured a lot of the elements that I felt I want to speak to. So I'm going to save us some time and just say that those are my comments for now. And I want to ask for you if you have any questions or need more clarification from us in terms of the feedback that we gave you tonight.
I think we have an official response to.
Yes. I'm sorry.
Do we have to actually, because there were in the presentation there were some things we had to answer?
Oh. That's just to structure your discussion. I think, if staff or the applicant feels like they need direction on something that you've missed, I think we can ask that. I would like to say one thing, if I may, at this point. From hearing your discussions and all of your comments, it sounds to me as if you do have concerns. Each of you has, different concerns or some of the same concerns, but that overall, if the applicant is able to address your concerns, it sounds to me that you probably would not have a problem making the finding of substantial conformity with the PDP. Am I reading that correctly?
And I just wanted that to be super clear.
Yes. Thank you.
I would say it's a yes for me.
That's a yes for me as well.
That's a yes for me too.
For me as well.
Yes, especially, yes, if you deal with building 13.
Yes, please.
No, that sounds pretty unambiguous. That's the threshold question that Miru presented at the beginning. So I just want to make sure we leave this meeting with
that's
an
good.
answer to that question.
Great.
All right, good, thank you.
So that said, is there anything else that you'd like to hear from us or more clarification before moving forward? Okay, great. Looking forward to seeing you back again with some improvements and adjustments. We have the model here. Do you want to take some time and show that to us after the meeting?
No.
No?
No. During
Yeah?
the meeting would be better.
All right.
During the noticed public meeting would be a good idea.
Should we circulate around the model, or should they bring it to us?
That doesn't really matter, does it?
As long as you stay here and look at
It's
it,
just
however
awkward.
Do we
you'd
just
like,
come-
but
should we come down?
During the noticed meeting, you need to look at it and make your comments.
Understood. I can't see it from here, and so can we all go down?
I'll go down.
Yeah.
We've got feet.
Okay.
It'll be
If,
easier.
if you, Chair Guerrero, if you and the fellow commissioners wish to make comments, it's still part of the meeting, you're still in charge,
Yeah,
right?
you got it.
You've got a portable mic there that you could pass around.
Perfect.
If you want to do that,
Okay, I'll go this.
assuming it works.
It's very different when you're looking at a model of it. It's a different shape. This is,
So it's difficult at this scale to really fully represent what the buildings themselves look like.
Just for the
listeners
at home.
okay.
It's different at this scale.
Is it on?
Working?
Yeah, I just wanted to make him aware.
Just talk right into it. Talk right into it.
Mark, right? Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's
Okay. So it's difficult at this scale to fully represent the exact architectural configuration, and certainly as we move forward with the development of the design, we'll provide more detail about exactly what's happening here. There was a comment earlier, and I just want to address kind of one specific thing. There was a comment about the distance between buildings and whether that was sufficient and what would happen in that space. And it's perhaps a little more difficult to see. We'll get these again, aligned in their right spots. But there is a minimum of 60 feet between the buildings. And so that will be created not just as a sidewalk space, but as a, as usable space, an event. It's going to mean something to pass through there, and there'll be activities and, ability to sit. Or maybe it'll be, a deeply landscaped spot where you actually transition through there. But we're currently in the process of developing, what that landscape plan looks like. So, be assured that, those aren't going to be forgotten spaces. They're going to be really exciting spaces that draw you in. You can see a little more development here because these buildings, we're starting to think about the material expressions and how they relate. This obviously is just a block because those are
you found those.
future down the way. And we appreciate, I think, the comments that were made about the mass of building 13, 14.
Building here. The Sherwin-Williams.
Yeah, these, we think that's the current configuration taken from the FDP, submittals for those buildings.
So see, those are apartments. What's here? Apartments, yeah. So they're viewing out. So
They have balconies, right?
they have, yeah. So one concern I was thinking about was like, if I was living there, the wall better be nice looking or whatever. And there's a lot of people who don't have problems living in front of walls, but if you can live in front of a wall, could have an opportunity, could be terraced. There's a lot of opportunities there.
Right. Yeah, we appreciate the comments, and we'll certainly, I think, take those to heart as we look in more detail at what that building can be, what it looks like.
Do you have any other comments here as we look at it?
Well, I'm thinking just to give you some ideas, and I have some photographs I could send you. I can't remember if I was in Sacramento or it was in Boulder. college town I was in had a parking structure, and the campus police were actually located in that parking structure. So I'm sure your campus is going to have some form of security or facilities operations. And I think that, if we could reduce your size, I think we could terrace this back to where you have lower levels here, so this could get more morning sun and they can create some views. So we're talking about eliminating spaces, of course, and that's something we are all kind of pointing you towards. So a way to do that would be to terrace this, and then maybe use this corner of this for your facilities operations or your security operations, so that would activate that. I think it would also make people on, residents and people on Horton that aren't part of the campus feel additional safety, as well as providing funds. So just an idea of a way that I'm hearing the commissioners saying, is there more use you could use for this parking structure, and how can you make it more amenable to the people who live next door to it? So that's just a suggestion.
Thank you, Commissioner Keller. You have a comment here?
No, I think I covered it. Yeah, I covered most of it. One general thing again was, are we anticipating any people from this side to access? Because this is such a large block, 800 feet long. I don't know if there's a need for like a mid-block crossing or something, or if most of the people would get on to the west side of Hollis Street at these intersections and access these buildings. But
this is grocery outlet, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes.
So that part won't have a relation to this. Yeah. This is part of Griffles?
It's part of Griffles owns that.
So Griffles is over here and over here, so they would probably cross here.
Yeah, my
reaction here.
My comment was more about, say if, for instance, if you have retail space like cafes and whatnot, or lunch spaces, probably these employees would want to go and access that, and there's no safe crossing unless they go and access the.
And they're going to jaywalk.
Yeah, they are going to jaywalk. So that was just a thought. But again, I don't think that this particular project at this stage covers that, so I didn't make that comment.
I have one new comment, and we have a greenway that comes through here, and it comes and meets up. So so it's going to go like this, and it's going to hit.
Comes along
here,
back here,
but it's going to hit that bridge to there.
Bridge.
Okay,
Yeah.
to there. Okay.
Yeah, we just want to thank you guys for bringing it on.
Yeah, it's really helpful.
Very
it's
engaging.
Just super. Yeah, you really. And I did want to say I like that balcony on this guy here. That's kind of cool.
Well, this is going to be balcony here too, right?
Yes.
That's cool too.
Yeah, that will have some great views.
Right. And I like the fact that this has western exposure, so it's going to be a warmer side of the building than if you put the building here and have
cool.
the eastern.
Thank you so much.
All right, I think that covers the comments that we have for the model, and we'll head back up to the podium here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to continue on to item number 10 on the agenda and open it up for Planning Commissioner comments. Are there any comments from the commissioners at this moment?
No.
Nope, seeing none. I'm going to adjourn this meeting at 10:18.